I've been a park ranger in the small town of Harlan, nestled deep in the folds of the Appalachian Mountains for going on 16 years now. Harlan's the kind of place where time moves slow, like molasses in winter, and the hills seem to lean in close, watching over you with ancient eyes. The population hovers around 1,000 souls, give or take, mostly folks who've lived here their whole lives, tied to the land by blood and history. Coal mining used to be the lifeblood, but that dried up decades ago, leaving behind scarred earth and stories that echo in the hollows. My days are predictable, patrolling the trails, marking off erosion spots, dealing with the occasional lost tourist who underestimates how quickly the fog can swallow a path. I warn them about black bears, rattlesnakes, and the importance of staying on marked routes. But truth be told, it's the quiet that gets to most people. The way the mountains absorb sound, turning a shout into a whisper before it travels 10 feet. Secrets thrive here, buried under layers of leaf litter and forgotten mining shafts. I've seen my share of odd things over the years. A deer carcass stripped clean overnight with no tracks around it, lights flickering in abandoned homesteads where no one's lived since the Great Depression, but nothing that couldn't be chalked up to nature or imagination. Until that fall in 2018. That's when something shifted, like the ground itself decided to remind us who's really in charge. It still haunts me, keeps me awake on those long nights when the wind howls through the pines, sounding almost like voices calling from afar. It was mid-October, the leaves ablaze in reds and golds, carpeting the forest floor in a way that muffled every step. The air had that crisp bite, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from distant chimneys. I was at the ranger station, a squat log building on the edge of town, sipping coffee that tasted like it had been brewed from creek water. The phone rang around dusk, the old landline jangling like it was annoyed to be disturbed. On the other end was a man named Harlan Tate, local mechanic, father of 3, lived in a clapboard house just off the main road. His voice was unsteady, cracking like dry branches underfoot. "Ranger Ellis," he said. "We were out on Mill Creek Trail today, me and the family. Heard something. Unnatural." I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under my weight, and asked for details. He described it haltingly, whispers in the woods, not the wind rustling leaves or animals scurrying, but actual words. Murmurs that seemed to come from all directions, too faint to make out clearly, but enough to send chills down your spine. His wife had clutched the kids close, and they'd hightailed it back to their car. It felt like someone was watching us, calling us deeper in. I nodded to myself, though he couldn't see it. People get spooked easy out here, especially as the days shorten and shadows lengthen. The trail's an old one, snaking through dense rhododendron thickets and past remnants of the coal era, collapsed shafts where boys used to play daredevil games before the warnings went up. I told Tate I'd check it out first thing in the morning, advised him to stay off the trails until then. He thanked me, but there was a tremor in his voice that stuck with me after I hung up. I stared out the window at the darkening sky, the mountains silhouetted like sleeping giants. Something about his story nagged at me, a faint echo of old-timers' tales I'd heard around campfires, whispers from the hills, luring folks to their doom. That night, sleep didn't come easy. My cabin's a modest affair, built by my grandfather back in the 50s, with creaky floors and walls that let in drafts. I lay there, listening to the usual symphony, owls hooting, distant coyotes yipping, the occasional crack of a falling branch. But underneath it all, I imagined those whispers Tate described, slithering through the cracks like smoke. Mary crossed my mind then, my sister, gone too soon in a wreck on these winding roads 5 years prior. She'd loved hiking, always dragging me on her adventures. I shook it off, chalking it up to the season's melancholy. Come morning, I'd sort it out. Dawn broke gray and overcast, the kind of day where the clouds hang low, pressing down on the ridges. I met Jim at the station, my partner, a burly man in his late 50s with a beard like steel wool and eyes that had seen every corner of these woods. He'd been ranging longer than me, started back when poaching was still a big issue. "Heard about the Tate call," he grunted, as we loaded up the truck with gear, radios, flashlights, first aid kit, a couple of rifles just in case. Jim wasn't one for small talk, but he had a way of reading the land, noticing shifts in the wind or animal behavior that I sometimes missed. We drove out to the Mill Creek trailhead, a forgotten spot about 10 miles from town. The gravel lot was overgrown with weeds pushing through cracks, and the signpost leaned at an angle, faded letters warning of steep drops and wildlife. No other vehicles were there, which was odd for a Saturday. Usually you'd see at least a few locals or leaf peepers. We shouldered our packs and started up the trail, boots crunching on the leaf-strewn path. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying foliage, and a light mist clung to the underbrush, making everything feel muffled.
For the first mile or so, it was routine. We chatted sporadically, Jim about his grandkids, me about the upcoming winter prep. The trail wound upward, flanked by towering hemlocks and maples, their branches interlacing overhead like a cathedral ceiling. Rhododendrons crowded the edges, their glossy leaves forming natural tunnels that blocked out the weak sunlight. We passed a few old mining markers, rusted plaques half buried in the dirt, remnants of the boom that built Harlan. Jim pointed out a fresh bear scrape on a tree trunk, claws raking deep into the bark. "Big one," he muttered. "Keep an eye out." But as we crested a small rise and dipped into the hollow, a natural depression where the trail narrowed and the trees grew denser, the atmosphere shifted. Subtly at first, like a chill seeping through your jacket. The bird song that had accompanied us faded away, leaving only the sound of our footsteps and breathing. No squirrels chattering, no wind sighing through the leaves, just a heavy, oppressive silence that made my ears ring. I glanced at Jim. His jaw was set tight, eyes scanning the woods. "Quiet today," I said, trying to sound casual. He nodded, but didn't reply. About 2 miles in, near where the path skirted an old sinkhole from a collapsed shaft, we spotted it, a single boot half sunk in the mud beside the trail. It was a men's hiking boot, size 11 maybe, caked in dirt but not weathered enough to have been there long. The laces were still knotted neatly, as if the owner had simply vanished mid-stride, leaving it behind. I knelt down, prodding it with a stick. No blood, no signs of struggle, but the mud around it was undisturbed, no footprints leading away. "Could be from a hiker who lost it crossing a stream," Jim suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. We marked the spot with a flag and pressed on, the boot lingering in my mind like an unanswered question. The whispers started soon after, so faint at first I thought it was my imagination. A murmur on the edge of hearing, like wind through distant branches, but with a rhythm that suggested words. We stopped, heads cocked, listening. Nothing. We continued, but it returned, stronger this time, weaving through the trees. "Did you hear that?" I asked Jim. He froze, paling beneath his beard. "Yeah, sounds like talking." We strained our ears, the silence amplifying every nuance. It wasn't animal, no growl to chirp. It was human-like, fragmented phrases drifting on the air. "Come closer." And then chillingly, names. "Ranger Ellis." My blood ran cold. How could that be? No one knew we were out here except the station dispatcher. Jim's eyes widened. Heard my name too. And Sarah. Sarah was his wife, passed from cancer 3 years back. He rarely spoke of her, but the pain was etched in his features now. We weren't alone, that much was clear, but scanning the underbrush revealed nothing. No movement, no figures lurking. The mist had thickened, curling around trunks like fingers, reducing visibility to 50 feet. My heart picked up pace, a steady thrum in my chest. Protocol said to investigate, but instinct screamed to turn back. "Let's keep moving," I said, voice steadier than I felt. Probably echoes from somewhere. But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. Echoes don't know your name, don't dredge up the dead. The trail descended further into the hollow, the path growing muddier, roots snaking across like veins. The whispers persisted, growing in volume and clarity, as if whatever produced them was drawing nearer, or we were drawing nearer to it. They spoke of personal things now, snippets that hit like punches. "Mary's waiting, Ellis. She misses the hikes." My sister's voice, or something mimicking it, soft and accusatory. I hadn't told anyone about our last argument before the accident, how she'd wanted one more trail run and I'd begged off for work. Jim was muttering under his breath, ashen, no doubt hearing echoes of his own regrets. We pushed on, flashlights out now despite the daylight, beams cutting through the gloom. Up ahead through the thinning trees loomed the ruins of an old cabin, one of those settler homesteads from the 1800s, long abandoned after the mine opened. The roof had caved in years ago, walls sagging like tired bones, overgrown with vines and moss. The whispers emanated from there, louder, more insistent, a chorus of voices overlapping in a cacophony of pleas and warnings. I tried the radio, thumbing the button. "Station, this is Ellis. We're at the old cabin on Mill Creek. Possible disturbance?" Static hissed back, no response. Jim gripped his rifle tighter. "We should head back, Ellis. This ain't right." But I felt it, a pull, magnetic and inexorable, like the whispers were threads reeling me in. "Just a quick look," I said, "to be sure." We approached cautiously, boots sinking into the soft earth around the ruin. The door hung off its hinges, gaping like a mouth. Inside, the dim light revealed chaos. The floor strewn with debris, not just rotten leaves, but personal belongings. Wallets scattered like fallen leaves, keys glinting dully, faded photographs of smiling families curled at the edges, a child's backpack, zipper half open, spilling crayons. My stomach twisted. These weren't ancient relics, they looked recent, untouched by weather. The whisper swelled, filling the space, recounting tales in fragmented bursts, A hiker's fall into a ravine miles away. A child lost in the fog calling for mom. Accidents from years past detailed with eerie precision. In the far corner, shrouded in shadow, a figure huddled, back to us, unmoving. It was human-sized, clad in tattered clothes, knees drawn up. The voices seemed to pour from it, a ventriloquist dummy come to life. "Who's there?" I called, voice echoing oddly in the confined space. No response, but the figure shifted slightly, as if breathing. Jim shone his light, illuminating details. Matted hair, pale skin visible through rips in the fabric. We edged closer, hearts pounding, the air thick with the musty scent of decay and something metallic, like old blood.
When we were mere feet away, the figure turned slowly, deliberately, and that's when the world tilted. It wasn't a person, not really. The face. There was no face, just a void, shadow swirling where features should be. But as it moved, the walls around us seemed to come alive. The wood grain twisted, forming impressions, faces etched into the planks, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. Dozens of them, layered over each other, like the cabin had absorbed the essences of the lost. Mary's face flickered there for a moment, accusatory, then dissolved into another. Jim yelled, bolting for the door, and I followed, legs pumping on adrenaline. The whispers chased us, swelling into a roar, names and secrets hurled like accusations. We ran blindly back up the trail, branches whipping our faces, roots tripping us. The boot was still there, mocking, but we didn't stop. Bursting into the parking lot, we collapsed against the truck, gasping. The whispers faded as suddenly as they'd begun, leaving only the pounding of blood in our ears. Back at the station, we reported it, but what could we say? Hallucinations? Mass hysteria? A team went out the next day, found the cabin empty. No items, no figure, just rot and ruin. The boot was gone too, as if the woods had reclaimed it. We drove to the Tate's house that evening, a modest place with a swing set in the yard. Knocked but no answer. The door was unlocked, swinging open to reveal an empty home, furniture in place, dinner half prepped on the stove, but no sign of the family. Neighbors said they hadn't seen them since the day before. Searches turned up nothing. They vanished like smoke. Locals whispered about the trailhead being built over an old burial ground, settlers' graves disturbed during the mining days. Curses, they said, the dead calling the living to join them. I avoid Mill Creek now, reroute hikers elsewhere. But on quiet nights at the station, when the wind picks up, I hear them again, whispers scratching at the edges of my mind, calling me back. Mary's voice among them, patient, waiting. It's not ghosts, not monsters. It's the mountains. They remember everything, the lives taken, the secrets buried, and they don't forget. They never forget. The days after that incident blurred into a haze of paperwork and uneasy silences. Jim and I didn't talk much about it at first. He took a few days off, said he needed to visit family up north. I stayed, poring over maps and old records, trying to make sense of what we'd experienced. The ranger logs went back decades, yellowed pages filled with neat handwriting detailing patrols, wildlife sightings, the occasional rescue. Buried in the entries from the 70s were mentions of similar reports, hikers hearing voices on Mill Creek, always in the fall, always in that hollow. One entry stood out, a ranger named Harlan, coincidence with the town name, who'd investigated whispers in '62. He described a pull toward the cabin, found items there too, but dismissed it as squatters. He vanished a week later, his truck left at the trailhead, boot prints leading in but not out. I slammed the book shut, a chill crawling up my spine. Was that what happened to the Tates? Drawn back, unable to resist? I drove out to their house again that night, under a moonless sky. The place was dark, windows like empty eyes. Inside, everything frozen in time. Toys scattered in the living room, a pot of beans cold on the stove, emitting a faint sour smell. On the kitchen table, a note in childish scrawl. The voices said, "Come play." My hand shook as I pocketed it, evidence or delusion, I wasn't sure. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and for a moment, I swore I heard a child's laughter, faint and echoing. Sleep became a battle. My cabin, once a refuge, felt exposed, the walls too thin against the encroaching woods. I'd wake in the dead of night, convinced someone was whispering outside my window, names, fragments of conversations from my past. Mary's accident replayed in dreams, the screech of tires on wet pavement,
her car plunging off the ridge, the futile search through the wreckage. In the dreams, she'd turn to me, face shadowed, murmuring, "Why didn't you come?" I started leaving lights on, radio tuned to static for company. Work suffered. I snapped at colleagues, avoided patrols near Mill Creek. Jim returned a week later, looking haggard, beard unkempt. We shared a beer at the local bar, a dim joint called The Hollow, with faded mining photos on the walls. "Sarah," he said finally, staring into his glass. The whispers knew things, private things, how she suffered at the end. I nodded, throat tight. We didn't speculate further. Some things in these hills defy explanation. Nature's not just trees and streams. It's a living thing, with memories etched into the rock and soil. The settlers knew it, the miners too. Disturb the ground, and it pushes back. Weeks turn to months, the incident fading into Harlan's collective memory like so many others. Winter blanketed the mountains in snow, trails impassable, giving me time to regroup. But spring brought thaw, and with it renewed reports. A solo hiker called in, voice panicked, whispers on Mill Creek, calling his deceased father's name. I dispatched a team, but they found nothing, just silence and fresh boot prints that ended abruptly. The hiker made it out, shaken but unharmed. I volunteered for desk duty after that, citing back issues, but really it was fear. Fear of that pull, of answering the call. One evening in May, as rain pattered on the station roof, the phone rang again. Anonymous caller, local accent. "The cabin's collecting again, Ranger. Items piling up. You gonna ignore it like last time?" I hung up, heart racing, but couldn't shake it. Against better judgment, I drove out at dusk, alone this time. The trailhead lot was empty, mist rising from the warming earth. I hiked in, flashlight beam bobbing, the path familiar yet alien. Silence enveloped me, broken only by dripping water and my labored breaths. The hollow approached, air growing heavier, whispers stirring like awakened snakes. They started midway, faint but insistent. "Ellis, back so soon." Mary's impatient. I pressed on, sweat beading despite the cool air. The cabin loomed, more decayed than before, vines choking the frame. Inside, the floor was a mosaic of lost things. A woman's scarf, a man's watch stopped at 3:17, a child's drawing of a family under a stormy sky. The corner held the figure again, huddled, whispering narratives of loss. The Tate family's last moments, drawn back by the voices, stepping into the shadows. I approached, hand outstretched, the pull overwhelming. The figure turned, void face shifting, walls alive with faces, the Tates now among them, mouths agape. Terror surged, but also sorrow, a deep, aching grief for the forgotten. I backed away, whispers clawing at my mind, and fled, the woods seeming to close in behind me. That was the last time I set foot on Mill Creek. I transferred stations the following year to a flatter post downstate, away from the hills. But the whispers follow, faint on windy nights, reminding me, the mountains don't let go easily. They hold on to their secrets, their dead, their regrets. Sometimes I wonder if I've left part of myself there, etched into the wood, waiting for the next ranger to hear the call. It's not over. It never is in places like Harlan. The land remembers, and one day it might call me home for good. Expanding on that, let me tell you about the aftermath in more detail, because it didn't end with my transfer. Letters started arriving at my new post, anonymous, postmarked from Harlan. Envelopes yellowed like old paper, containing scraps, a lace from that boot, a faded photo from the cabin floor. No words, just those items, as if the sender knew they'd speak for themselves. I burned the first few, but they kept coming, each one stirring the whispers in my head. Jim called once, voice slurred from drink. "It's getting worse, Ellis. More disappearances. The hollow's hungry." He hung up before I could respond. I looked into it online. News clippings sparse. Hiker's phone missing. Mill Creek hearing voices on hikers. But the article skirted the truth, blaming weather or wildlife. Locals know better. They've lived with the land's moods for generations. One night, years later, December 2025 actually, just last week, I woke to whispers clearer than ever. Not outside, but inside my head, recounting details I'd buried deep. Mary's final words on the phone, "See you soon, brother." I sat up, room spinning, and for a moment the walls seemed to warp, faces flickering in the grain. It passed, but the dread lingered, a weight on my chest. I've started hiking again, flat trails far from Appalachia, but even here, in the quiet moments, I hear them, calling, waiting. The mountains may be miles away, but their memory stretches long, threading through the veins of those who felt their touch. And I know, deep down, One day I'll answer, because some halls you can't ignore forever.
My name's Clara, and for the last 12 years I've been the only full-time park ranger stationed at Boonville, a speck of a town tucked so deep in the Appalachian folds that the sun has to fight its way down the ridges just to say hello. Most folks here were born in the shadow of these mountains, and will die in them too, and they accept the quiet the way other people accept traffic or taxes. Me? I chose it. After the city chewed me up and spit me out, divorce papers, a job I hated, a life that felt like it belonged to somebody else, I came home to these hills because they don't ask questions and they don't pretend to be kind. They just are. Solitary patrols suit me fine. Miles of empty trail, the creak of my boots, the low hum of insects, and the knowledge that if something goes wrong out here, it's on me and me alone to set it right. I've pulled drunks out of creeks, carried heat-stroked tourists down fire roads, and once tracked a lost child for 18 hours through a whiteout. I've never been afraid of being alone. Until the summer of 2020, when the moon got fat and low, and something in the hollow decided it had been alone long enough. It started small, the way everything does out here. Trail markers kept disappearing. Not broken or knocked over. Gone. The little orange diamonds nailed to trees, the wooden signs at junctions, even a couple of the heavy metal blazes the Forest Service bolted on years ago. Vanished overnight, screws and all, like they'd never been there. Hikers started coming in confused, saying the loop trails spit them out miles from where they parked, some of them looping the same stretch of path 3 or 4 times without realizing it. I blamed teenagers at first. Boonville's got its share of bored kids with nothing to do except drink warm beer and raise a little hell. I put up game cameras, drove the back roads at night with a spotlight, even parked myself in the woods a few evenings with a thermos of coffee and a bad attitude. Caught nothing but raccoons, and one very embarrassed couple who thought nobody would notice their truck rocking on a fire road. By the end of June, the complaints had doubled, and the moon was swelling toward full, hanging over the ridges like a nickel somebody polished too bright. That's when I decided to walk the Black Hollow Trail myself, after dark, because whatever was doing this didn't seem to work in daylight. Black Hollow isn't on any of the pretty brochures. It's a bowl-shaped depression about 4 miles off the main ridge road, hemmed in by steep laurel-choked slopes that the sun only touches for an hour or two around noon. Old-timers call it a misery bowl, because sound dies in there and compasses spin lazy circles. Loggers avoided it, moonshiners avoided it, and the Park Service never bothered putting in a proper trail, just a faint path foot worn by deer and the occasional curious hiker who ignores the warnings. I parked the truck at the Forest Service gate a little after 9 p.m., the sky already washed silver by that moon. Crickets were loud, but their song had a hitch in it, like a record skipping every few seconds. I told myself it was nothing, just the heat making them lazy. I slung my pack, checked the radio, clicked on my headlamp, and started down the old logging trace that leads to the hollow. The air cooled fast as I descended, carrying that heavy green smell of ferns and wet rock. My beam cut clean tunnels through the dark, catching spider webs and the occasional flicker of eyes, possum, maybe a fox, but nothing that didn't scatter when I swept the light over it. An hour in, the trace petered out, and the real path began. Narrow, root-tangled, switchbacking down between rhododendrons so thick it felt like walking through a tunnel somebody forgot to finish. The first wrong thing was the silence. Not the normal night quiet. I've walked enough trails to know the difference. This was heavier, like the hollow had pulled a blanket over itself. No crickets now. No owls. Not even the wind moving high in the canopy. Just my breathing and the soft crunch of leaves under my boots. I stopped to listen and felt the skin along my arms brick up. My radio crackled once, then went dead. No static. No carrier tone. Just nothing. I keyed it anyway, out of habit. Base? This is Clara. Radio check. My own voice came back at me a half-second later, thin and warped, like somebody speaking underwater. I laughed it off. Cheap batteries. High mineral content in the rock. Whatever. But I left the channel open after that, just in case. The trail bottomed out into the hollow proper, a rough circle maybe 200 yards across, ringed by slopes so steep they looked black even under the moon. The ground was strangely bare in the center, just a patch of dirt worn smooth, surrounded by a perfect ring of fist-sized stones. No moss on them, no weeds pushing up between. I've seen cairns before, seen kids stack rocks for fun, but this was too neat, too deliberate. And there were no footprints. Not mine, I just walked in, and not anyone else's. The dirt inside the circle looked raked, almost polished. I stepped closer, sweeping my light across it. And that's when the shadows moved wrong. It wasn't dramatic,
No sudden lunge, no horror movie jump. Just a slow inhale, like the darkness itself drew breath. The moonlight on the ground rippled, the way water does when something big passes underneath. My beam flickered. I thought the batteries were dying, but when I smacked the headlamp, it steadied, and that's when I saw the shape at the edge of the trees. Tall, taller than any man had a right to be in those slopes. It stood just past the stone circle, half lit by the moon, body stretched thin like taffy, arms too long, head tilted at an angle that hurt to look at. I froze. Every instinct said bear standing upright, but bears don't cast shadows that bend the wrong way, and bears make noise. This thing was quiet as the hollow itself. I found my voice. Park Service. Who's there? Ranger Authority. Steady. The same tone I use on drunks and poachers. It didn't answer. Instead, it lifted one arm. Slow. Mirroring the way I held my flashlight. When I shifted my weight, it shifted too. When I took a cautious step back, it took one forward. Not walking. Gliding. Like its feet never quite touched the ground. The moonlight slid off it like oil. I felt the first twist of real fear then. Cold and low in my gut. I backed up another step, and the shape detached from the trees entirely. Darkness peeling away from darkness, moving across the barren circle toward me. No footsteps, no rustle of leaves, just that smooth, inevitable slide. I ran. Not smart. Running blind downhill in a laurel hell is a good way to break your neck, but panic doesn't care about smart. Branches whipped my face, roots caught at my boots. I could hear myself crashing like a herd of deer, but behind me there was nothing. No pursuit, no heavy breathing, just the sense of something keeping pace without effort. I don't know how long I ran, minutes, maybe an hour, until I burst out onto an old service road I didn't remember being anywhere near the hollow. Dawn was starting to pale the sky, that thin gray before actual light. I bent over, hands on knees, sucking air, waiting for my heart to slow. When I finally straightened and looked back, the shape was still there, standing at the tree line maybe 50 yards away. The moon was behind it now, turning it into a cutout silhouette, but I could feel it watching. Then the first ray of real sunlight touched the ridge above us, and the shadow folded in on itself like smoke caught in a draft. Gone. Just gone. I made it back to the truck somehow, legs shaking so bad I could barely work the clutch. The radio worked fine once I was out of the hollow, Bays asking where the hell I'd been all night. I told them I'd got turned around, nothing more. Didn't mention the circle, the shape, any of it. Some things you don't put in official reports unless you want a psych eval and a transfer to a desk in Knoxville. The aftermath was worse than the night itself. I went back in daylight with 2 volunteers and a can of orange spray paint. The stone circle was still there, but the ground inside looked disturbed, like something heavy had lay on it and then got up. We broke the ring, scattered the stones, painted big X's on the trees, universal symbol for do not enter. I filed it under slope erosion and closed the trail. But the reports kept coming, full moon nights mostly, hikers seeing tall shapes at the edge of their headlamps, couples parked on makeout ridges swearing something walked past their windows without touching the gravel. One kid claimed his shadow lagged behind him by 3 seconds when he ran. I started driving the back roads myself on those nights, windows down, listening. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse, something moving just past the reach of my headlights, always heading toward the hollow. I tried to explain it away. Sleep deprivation, swamp gas, infrasound from underground streams messing with my equilibrium. But explanations only go so far when you wake up at 3 a.m. with moonlight striping your bedroom floor and the feeling that something is standing just outside the window, matching your breathing. I started leaving the curtains open on purpose, daring it. Nothing ever showed. It only comes where the light is thin and the ground remembers what it's lost. There's an old story the grannies tell around here about notchers, people who got so turned around in the woods they walked out on shadows and never found them again. I used to laugh at that. I don't laugh anymore, because some nights when the moon is full and low and the crickets hitch in their song, I'll catch my reflection in a window and swear it hesitates half a heartbeat before it moves with me. And I know, deep as bone, that whatever's down in Black Hollow isn't finished. It's patient. It waits for the light to thin and the loneliness to creep in, the same way the mountains have waited centuries for rivers to grind them down. Loss lingers here like smoke in your clothes after a bonfire. You can air it out, but the smell never quite leaves. I still patrol, still walk the ridges alone, but I don't go near the hollow anymore, not even in brightest day. Some places the land keeps for itself, and some debts don't get paid until you walk back in to settle them. On quiet nights, I sit on my porch with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the dark line of trees, and I wonder how much of me is still down there, stretched thin across the dirt, waiting for the moon to fill up again. Because shadows don't forget the shape they once belonged to, and out here in these old mountains, everything lost is just waiting for the right kind of light to come looking.
I'm Harlan Reed, and for 22 years now I've worn the green and gray of a park ranger out of Pineville, a little mountain town so far back in the holler that the mail truck only comes 3 days a week. Pineville sits in a narrow valley where Beaver Creek cuts through like a silver blade, the Appalachians rising steep on both sides, holding the place close the way a mother cradles a sleeping child. Protective, maybe, but possessive too. Folks here don't leave much, and the ones who do usually come crawling back after the flatland world chews the wonder out of them. I stayed because the woods raised me, because after my daddy drowned in a flash flood when I was 9, the creek and the ridges felt like the only family that never lied to me. 20 years walking these trails, breaking up still sites, pulling tourists out of ravines, tagging bears for study. I thought I knew every move the mountains could throw, thought I'd seen the worst they had to offer. Then came the spring of 2017, when the water along Beaver Creek went quiet and started remembering things it had no right to remember. It began with the fish, first just a handful, smallmouth bass and bluegill floating belly up near the old mill ford, eyes milky, mouths open like they'd been mid-gasp when whatever took them struck. Locals grumbled about runoff from the new fracking pads up county, or maybe somebody dumping chemicals again. I took samples, sent them to the state lab in Charleston, came back clean, oxygen levels normal, no toxins, no heavy metals. A week later, the fish were piling up in the eddies, dozens at a time, then hundreds. You'd walk the bank and the shallows would be carpeted silver and white, bloated bodies nudging each other in the slow current. The smell wasn't rot yet, just that heavy, wet fish stink that clings to your clothes and won't wash out. Then the animals started turning up. A young buck wedged against a fallen sycamore, legs folded under it like it had simply lain down to die. Raccoons curled on the gravel bars, tails tucked neat, no blood, no predator marks. Even the birds quit the willows that line the banks. No herons stalking the shallows, no kingfishers rattling overhead. Just silence, thick and unnatural, pressing down on the water like a lid. I started patrolling the creek daily. It's maybe 6 miles of fishable water inside park boundaries, winding through second-growth hemlock and river birch, with deep pools under cut banks where the old-timers swear lunkers hide. I'd park at the lower bridge before dawn, work my way upstream on foot, notebook in hand, camera slung around my neck. The water looked perfect, clear enough to see every pebble on the bottom, sunlight speckling through the new leaves. But nothing moved in it. No minnows darting, no crawdads scuttling, not even the lazy swirl of a trout holding station. And the quiet. Lord, the quiet. Normally a creek this size sings constant, riffles chuckling over rocks, deeper pools murmuring, frogs carrying on like gossiping church ladies. Here there was nothing. My boots on the gravel sounded loud as gunshots. Even the wind seemed afraid to touch the surface. About 3 miles up, where the creek bends sharp around a sandstone bluff and pools deep, locals call it Whittle's Hole, I stopped to rest on a flat rock. The pool was mirror still, reflecting the sky and the overhanging willows perfect. I leaned over to fill my canteen and caught my face staring back. Tired eyes, gray creeping into my beard, the same face Daddy wore in old photos. I smiled without meaning to, and the reflection smiled a half-second late. I blinked, shook my head. Heat shimmer maybe, or tired eyes. But when I looked again, there were others. Faint at first, like smudges on glass, pale faces just under the surface drifting slow with the current that wasn't there. Men, women, a child or two. Eyes wide open, mouths moving silent. Not bloated or decayed, just still, patient, watching. I jerked back so hard I near fell off the rock. When I leaned in again, cautious, they were still there. More now, dozens. I recognized some without knowing how. Old Josiah Green, who drowned in the '89 flood. Little Annie McCoy, swept away in '03. My own daddy's face flickering among them, younger than I ever knew him, hair dark and eyes pleading. I told myself it was pareidolia, seeing patterns where none exist, the mind playing tricks with light and reflection. Happens to rangers sometimes, especially alone too long. I radioed base anyway, voice steadier than I felt. Checking Widow's Hole. Water's unusual. Send someone up when you can. Static answered, thick and rolling like the signal was drowning. I tried 3 more times, same result. The faces kept watching, mouth shaping words I felt more than heard. Stay, join, remember. One drifted closer, Annie McCoy, braids floating like weeds, and her small hand rose slow, fingers breaking the surface without a ripple. The water didn't part, it just accepted the hand the way it accepts leaves or rain. Those fingers reached toward my reflection, pale and pruned, and for a heartbeat I swear they brushed the underside of my own hand resting on the rock. Cold, bone cold, like creek water in March. I scrambled back, heart hammering so hard my vision pulsed. The hand sank smooth, leaving no disturbance, but the faces multiplied, filling the pool shoulder to shoulder, all turned up toward me. The water itself seemed to change, thicker, darker at the edges, clinging to the rocks instead of flowing free. I stood, boots suddenly heavy, like the gravel had turned to mud. When I lifted one foot, strands of water stretched between sole and stream, reluctant to let go.
Panic crept in slow, the way fog rises off the creek on cool mornings. I backed away from the pool, eyes locked on the surface. The faces followed, drifting with me, never breaking gaze. At the edge of the bluff, the willows leaned farther than they should, branches trailing in the water like they were listening. I turned upstream, telling myself I'd circle back on the ridge trail, get distance, get help. But the creek pulled at me, not physically, but in the way a half-remembered dream tugs when you're waking. Every step away felt wrong, like abandoning someone calling my name. The banks narrowed here, forcing me close to the water. Reflections flickered in every calm stretch. More faces, some I knew from missing posters tacked on the station bulletin board, others older, dressed in clothes from another century. Their mouths moved constant now, silent pleas pressing against the inside of my skull. Don't leave us alone, come down where it's quiet, we've been waiting. I walked faster, then jogged, boots slipping on whetstone. Behind me, the water thickened further, flowing sluggish like syrup, carrying shapes that rose partway, shoulders, arms, heads tilting as they emerged. Not violent, not lunging, just rising patient, dripping silence, matching my pace without hurry because they knew the creek bends back on itself eventually. Dusk came early under the canopy, shadows pooling deep. I tripped over a root hidden in moss, went down hard, palms scraping gravel. When I pushed up, my hands came way wet. Not blood, but creek water, though I was 10 feet from the bank. The shapes were closer now, half-formed figures standing knee-deep, water streaming off them in sheets yet never diminishing. Their faces were clear, Josiah's sunken cheeks, Annie's braids plastered flat, Daddy's eyes locked on mine with something between sorrow and hunger. I ran then, full out, lungs burning, branches clawing my sleeves. The creek ran with me, whispering over rocks in a voice that wasn't water at all. I felt it pulling at my boots, my shadow, my name. I burst out onto the upper bridge just as full dark settled, truck headlights cutting 2 tunnels through the night. I slammed the door, hands shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice. In the rearview mirror, the creek glinted black and empty, innocent as any mountain stream. No shapes, no faces, just water moving on like nothing had happened. I drove straight to the station, wrote a report that said, unusual wildlife mortality, possible algal bloom, recommend further testing, left out the rest. The deaths stopped the next week as sudden as they'd started. Fish returned, cautious at first, then thick as before. Frogs tuned up nights again. Folks forgot quick, the way mountain people do when something can't be explained away easy. But I didn't forget. Some nights I still drive down to the lower bridge, sit in the truck with the engine off, listening. The creek sings normal now, riffles and pools carrying on their endless conversation. Yet if I walk the bank alone, especially when the water runs high and dark after rain, I catch glimpses, a pale hand trailing just under the surface, a face watching from the reflection of an eddy. And sometimes, when fog lies thick and the moon is new, I feel that pull again, gentle, patient, like a hand on my sleeve. The water remembers every life it's taken, every sorrow poured into it over centuries. Flash floods, baptisms gone wrong, lovers' pacts, drunken stumbles. It holds them gentle, down deep where sound can't reach. And it waits, because sooner or later everybody in these mountains walks close to moving water. I've started fishing lice, started avoiding Widow's Hole altogether. But I know one spring when the dogwoods bloom white and the creek runs full with meltwater, I'll feel that tug stronger than ever. And maybe I'll answer. Maybe I'll wade in just to see if Daddy's still waiting, if Annie's braids still float like weeds. Because the quiet down there must be peaceful after all the noise of living. And in these old hills, the water never forgets a name it's learned. It just waits for you to speak it back. Years on, the memory sits in me like a stone in the boot. Heavy, constant, impossible to ignore on long walks. I took early retirement last year, citing knee problems nobody argued with. Moved into the old family cabin higher on the ridge, far enough from the creek that I can't hear it at night. But distance don't matter much when something's patient. Some mornings I wake with wet footprints on the porch boards, leading from the steps toward the tree line, then stopping sudden like whoever made them stepped out of this world entirely. I don't follow them anymore. I just sweep them away before the sun dries them permanent. Last week, a young couple went missing, parked at the lower bridge, fishing gear scattered, truck still warm when we found it. Search turned up nothing but one small shoe caught in the willows downstream, size for a child, though they had none. I didn't join the grid, just sat on my porch and watched the fog rise off the valley, thick as breath on cool glass. Somewhere down there, the water is singing soft, adding new voices to the chorus. And I know, same as I know the shape of these mountains in my sleep, that one day soon the creek will call clear enough I won't be able to pretend I don't hear. When that day comes, I'll walk down the old trace road before dawn, boots unlaced, and step in where the current runs deepest. Because some losses carve channels in you nothing else can fill, and the water remembers. It always remembers.
I'm Harlan Reed, and for 22 years now I've worn the green and gray of a park ranger out of Pineville, a little mountain town so far back in the holler that the mail truck only comes 3 days a week. Pineville sits in a narrow valley where Beaver Creek cuts through like a silver blade, the Appalachians rising steep on both sides, holding the place close the way a mother cradles a sleeping child. Protective, maybe, but possessive too. Folks here don't leave much, and the ones who do usually come crawling back after the flatland world chews the wonder out of them. I stayed because the woods raised me, because after my daddy drowned in a flash flood when I was 9, the creek and the ridges felt like the only family that never lied to me. 20 years walking these trails, breaking up still sites, pulling tourists out of ravines, tagging bears for study, I thought I knew every mood the mountains could throw, thought I'd seen the worst they had to offer. Then came the spring of 2017, when the water along Beaver Creek went quiet and started remembering things it had no right to remember. It began with the fish. First, just a handful, smallmouth bass and bluegill floating belly up near the old mill ford, eyes milky, mouths open like they'd been mid-gasp when whatever took them struck. Locals grumbled about runoff from the new fracking pads up county, or maybe somebody dumping chemicals again. I took samples, sent them to the state lab in Charleston, came back clean. Oxygen levels normal, no toxins, no heavy metals. A week later, the fish were piling up in the eddies, dozens at a time, then hundreds. You'd walk the bank and the shallows would be carpeted silver and white, bloated bodies nudging each other in the slow crowd. The smell wasn't rot yet, just that heavy, wet fish stink that clings to your clothes and won't wash out. Then the animals started turning up. A young wuck wedged against a fallen sycamore, legs folded under it like it had simply lain down to die. Raccoons curled on the gravel bars, tails tucked neat, no blood, no predator marks. Even the birds quit the willows that line the banks. No herons stalking the shallows, no kingfishers rattling overhead. Just silence, thick and unnatural, pressing down on the water like a lid. I started patrolling the creek daily. It's maybe 6 miles of fishable water inside park boundaries, winding through second-growth hemlock and river birch, with deep pools under cut banks where the old-timers swear lunkers hide. I'd park at the lower bridge before dawn, work my way upstream on foot, notebook in hand, camera slung around my neck. The water looked perfect, clear enough to see every pebble on the bottom, sunlight speckling through the new leaves. But nothing moved in it. No minnows darting, no crawdads scuttling, not even the lazy swirl of a trout holding station. And the quiet, Lord, the quiet. Normally a creek this size sings constant, riffles chuckling over rocks, deeper pools murmuring, frogs carrying on like gossiping church ladies. Here there was nothing. My boots on the gravel sounded loud as gunshots. Even the wind seemed afraid to touch the surface. About 3 miles up, where the creek bends sharp around a sandstone bluff and pools deep, locals call it Widow's Hole, I stopped to rest on a flat rock. The pool was mirror still, reflecting the sky and the overhanging willows perfect. I leaned over to fill my canteen and caught my face staring back, tired eyes, gray creeping into my beard, the same face Daddy wore in old photos. I smiled without meaning to, and the reflection smiled a half-second late. I blinked, shook my head, heat shimmer maybe, or tired eyes. But when I looked again, there were others. Faint at first, like smudges on glass, pale faces just under the surface, drifting slow with the current that wasn't there. Men, women, a child or two. Eyes wide open, mouths moving silent. Not bloated or decayed, just still, patient, watching. I jerked back so hard I near fell off the rock. When I leaned in again, cautious, they were still there. More now, dozens. I recognized some without knowing how. Old Josiah Green, who drowned in the '89 flood. Little Annie McCoy, swept away in '03. My own daddy's face flickering among them, younger than I ever knew him, dark hair and eyes pleading. I told myself it was pareidolia, seeing patterns where none exist, the mind playing tricks with light and reflection. Happens to rangers sometimes, especially alone too long. I radioed base anyway, voice steadier than I felt. Checking Widow's Hole, water's unusual, send someone up when you can. Static answered, thick and rolling, like the signal was drowning. I tried 3 more times, same result. The faces kept watching, mouths shaping words I felt more than heard. Stay, join, remember. One drifted closer, Annie McCoy, braids floating like weeds, and her small hand rose slow, fingers breaking the surface without a ripple. The water didn't part, it just accepted the hand the way it accepts leaves or rain. Those fingers reached toward my reflection, pale and pruned, and for a heartbeat I swear they brushed the underside of my own hand resting on the rock, cold, bone cold like creek water in March. I scrambled back, heart hammering so hard my vision pulsed. The hand sank smooth, leaving no disturbance, but the faces multiplied, filling the pool shoulder to shoulder, all turned up toward me. The water itself seemed to change, thicker, darker at the edges, clinging to the rocks instead of flowing free. I stood, boots suddenly heavy like the gravel had turned to mud. When I lifted one foot, strands of water stretched between sole and stream, reluctant to let go. Panic crept in slow, the way fog rises off the creek on cool mornings. I backed away from the pool, eyes locked on the surface. The faces followed, drifting with me, never breaking gaze. At the edge of the bluff, the willows leaned farther than they should, branches trailing in the water like they were listening. I turned upstream, telling myself I'd circle back on the ridge trail, get distance, get help. But the
creek pulled at me, not physically, but in the way a half-remembered dream tugs when you're waking. Every step away felt wrong, like abandoning someone calling my name. The banks narrowed here, forcing me close to the water. Reflections flickered in every calm stretch. More faces, some I knew from missing posters tacked on the station bulletin board, others older, dressed in clothes from another century. Their mouths moved constant now, silent pleas pressing against the inside of my skull. Don't leave us alone. Come down where it's quiet. We've been waiting. I walked faster, then jogged, boots slipping on wet stone. Behind me the water thickened further, flowing sluggish like syrup, carrying shapes that rose partway, shoulders, arms, heads tilting as they emerged. Not violent, not lunging, just rising, patient, drifting silence, matching my pace without hurry because they knew the creek bends back on itself eventually. Dusk came early under the canopy, shadows pooling deep. I tripped over a root hidden in moss, went down hard, palms scraping gravel. When I pushed up, my hands came away wet, not blood, but creek water, though I was 10 feet from the bank. The shapes were closer now, half-formed figures standing knee-deep, water streaming off them in sheets, yet never diminishing. Their faces were clear, Josiah's sunken cheeks, Annie's braids plastered flat, Daddy's eyes locked on mine with something between sorrow and hunger. I ran then, full out, lungs burying, branches clawing my sleeves. The creek ran with me, whispering over rocks in a voice that wasn't water at all. I felt it pulling at my boots, my shadow, my name. I burst out onto the upper bridge just as full dark settled, truck headlights cutting twin tunnels through the night. I slammed the door, hand shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice. In the rearview mirror, the creek glinted black and empty, innocent as any mountain stream. No shapes, no faces, just water moving on like nothing had happened. I drove straight to the station, wrote a report that said unusual wildlife mortality, possible algal bloom, recommend further testing, left out the rest. The deaths stopped the next week, as sudden as they'd started. But I didn't forget. Some nights I still drive down to the lower bridge, sit in the truck with the engine off, listening. The creek sings normal now, riffles and pools carrying on their endless conversation. Yet if I walk the bank alone, especially when the water runs high and dark after rain, I catch glimpses. A pale hand trailing just under the surface, a face watching from the reflection of an eddy. And sometimes when fog lies thick and the moon is new, I feel that pull again, gentle, patient, like a hand on my sleeve. The water remembers every life it's taken, every sorrow poured into it over centuries. Flash floods, baptisms gone wrong, lovers' pacts, drunken stumbles. It holds them gentle, down deep where sound can't reach. And it waits, because sooner or later everybody in these mountains walks close to moving water. I've started fishing less, started avoiding Widow's Hole altogether. But I know one spring when the dogwoods gloom white and the creek runs full with meltwater, I'll feel that tug stronger than ever. And maybe I'll answer. Maybe I'll wade in just to see if Daddy's still waiting, if Annie's braids still float like weeds, because the quiet down there must be peaceful after all the noise of living. And in these old hills, the water never forgets a name it's learned. It just waits for you to speak it back. Years on, the memory sits in me like a stone in the boot, heavy, constant, impossible to ignore on long walks. I took early retirement last year, citing knee problems nobody argued with, moved into the old family cabin higher on the ridge, far enough from the creek that I can't hear it at night. But distance don't matter much when something's patient. Some mornings I wake with wet footprints on the porch boards, leading from the steps toward the tree line, then stopping sudden like whoever made them stepped out of this world entirely. I don't follow them anymore. I just sweep them away before the sun dries them permanent. Last week, a young couple went missing, parked at the lower bridge, fishing gear scattered, truck still warm when we found it. Search turned up nothing but one small shoe caught in the willows downstream, size for a child, though they had none. I didn't join the grid, just sat on my porch and watched the fog rise off the valley, thick as breath on cold glass. Somewhere down there, the water is singing soft, adding new voices to the chorus. And I know, just as I know the shape of these mountains in my sleep, that one day soon the creek will call clear enough I won't be able to pretend I don't hear. When that day comes, I'll walk down the old trace road before dawn, boots unlaced, and step in where the current runs deepest, because some losses carve channels in you nothing else can fill, and the water remembers. It always remembers.
I remember the autumn of 2019 like it was etched into the bark of those old oaks out in the hills. My name's Elias, and I've been ranging these parks around the hamlet of Croft for going on 15 years now. Croft's one of those forgotten specks on the map in the heart of Appalachia, where the Blue Ridge Mountains swallow up the roads and the fog clings to the valleys like a bad dream that won't let go. Folks here live simple, hunting, fishing, tending small plots of land that the soil barely gives back to. The parks stretch out for miles, a patchwork of national forest and state land, dense with hemlock and rhododendron thickets that can hide a man or swallow him whole if he's not careful. I've tracked deer through snowdrifts, pulled hikers out of ravines after they twisted an ankle on a route, and once even chased off a black bear that got too bold near a campsite. But nothing prepared me for those footprints. They weren't animal, weren't quite human either, at least not in any way that made sense. And ever since, I've carried this weight, this unshakable feeling that the woods aren't just empty space. They're watching, waiting, laying traps for the ones who wander too far. It started on a crisp October morning, the kind where the leaves crunch underfoot like brittle bones and the air smells of damp earth and wood smoke from distant chimneys. I was at the ranger station, a squat log building tucked against the edge of the park, nursing a cup of black coffee that tasted like it had been boiled over a campfire.
The radio crackled to life around 9 a.m., static cutting through the quiet. It was dispatch from the county sheriff's office. A family out for a hike had lost their boy, little Tommy Hargrove, just 7 years old. His parents said he'd scampered off the trail, giggling about some funny tracks he'd spotted in the mud. They figured it was a raccoon or maybe a fox, but when they called after him, he didn't come back. Panic set in quick. The woods don't forgive mistakes like that. I grabbed my pack, water, compass, first aid, a flare gun just in case, and headed out in the old Ford truck, the tires kicking up gravel as I wound up the narrow road to the trailhead where they'd parked. The Hargroves were waiting there, faces pale as birch bark. The mother, Mrs. Hargrove, was clutching a small backpack that must have been Tommy's, her eyes red from crying. Her husband paced, hands shoved deep in his pockets, muttering about how they should have stuck to the paved paths. "He just ran off," she said, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Said the tracks looked like they were dancing. We turned our backs for a second." I nodded, trying to keep my tone steady. I've seen this before. Kids get curious, chase a squirrel or a butterfly, and before you know it, they're turned around in the underbrush. But something in her words stuck with me. Dancing tracks. Didn't sound like any animal I'd ever trailed. I asked for details, where exactly he'd pointed them out, and they led me to the spot, about a quarter-mile down the main trail where the path forked into a lesser-used one that snaked deeper into the hollow. There they were, plain as day in the soft dirt. Bare footprints, small like a child's, pressed into the mud where the overnight rain had softened the ground. They veered off the trail abruptly, heading into the thick brush that flanked the path. I knelt down, tracing the outline with my finger. The impressions were fresh, toes splayed out natural-like, but something felt off. No shoes in this chill? And the stride, it was playful, almost skipping, not the straight-line wander of a lost kid. "These his?" I asked, glancing up at the parents. Mr. Hargrove shook his head. He had on sneakers, little blue ones with Velcro. That sent a small ripple through me, but I pushed it down. Maybe Tommy had taken them off for some reason kids do, testing the mud, pretending to be an Indian scout like in the old stories. I told the Hargroves to stay put, radio if anything changed, and plunged into the brush after the tracks. The forest closed in quick once I left the trail. Branches tugged at my jacket, and the light filtered through the canopy in dappled patches, turning the ground into a mosaic of shadows. I've always felt at home out here, but that day the quiet was heavier, like the woods were holding their breath. Birds that usually chattered from the treetops were silent. Even the wind seemed to hush as I pushed deeper. The footprints led me on, meandering like the kid was in no hurry, stopping here and there where the dirt showed scuffs, as if he'd paused to pick up a stick or a stone. I called out Tommy's name every few minutes, my voice echoing back from the ridges, but nothing answered, except the rustle of leaves. After about 20 minutes, the tracks started to change. Subtle at first, the impressions elongating, the toes stretching longer than any child's foot should. I stopped, squatting to examine one. It looked like the foot had grown mid-step, the heel digging deeper, the arch flattening out. My mind raced. Maybe an animal overlapping the prints? But no, the pattern was continuous, no breaks. A chill prickled the back of my neck, the kind you get when you feel eyes on you but turn and see nothing. I pressed on, the undergrowth thickening into a tangle of laurel and vines that clawed at my legs. The air grew cooler, damper, carrying that musty scent of decaying leaves and something else, faint like wet fur or unwashed skin. Legends float around these parts about the woods, stories passed down in whispers over moonshine. Feral people, they call them, folks who went wild generations ago, living off the land, shunning civilization. Old-timers in Croft talk about sightings, glimpses of ragged figures in the mist, eerie calls at night that mimic human voices. I've always chalked it up to tall tales, the kind that keep kids from straying too far. But as those footprints twisted onward, my skepticism started to crack. They weren't just elongating now, they were multiplying. At first it was a second set joining in, mirroring the first but slightly larger, like an older sibling tagging along. Then a third, smaller again, weaving in and out. It looked like a game, a chase, the prints overlapping in playful chaos. Hours slipped by as I followed, the sun climbing higher but barely piercing the dense foliage. My boots sank into the loam and sweat beaded on my forehead despite the autumn bite. I radioed back to base once, updating my position, but the signal was spotty, words cutting in and out like a bad connection. Still on the trail, tracks leading north, no sign yet. The footprints led me down into a hollow, where a trickle of a stream gurgled over mossy rocks. I crossed carefully, balancing on stones, and on the other side, the changes grew weirder. Some prints showed claws, not sharp like a bear's, but blunt, like overgrown nails scraping the earth. Others had an extra toe, or what looked like one, protruding oddly. My heart picked up pace, a steady thrum in my chest. This wasn't right. Animals don't leave prints like this, people neither. I thought about turning back, calling in more help, but the thought of that little boy out here alone pushed me forward. The terrain roughened, climbing up a ridge blanketed in fallen leaves that whispered underfoot. I paused to catch my breath, leaning against a gnarled ivy, and that's when I heard it. The first sound that wasn't my own. A low rustle, like something moving through the brush parallel to me, just out of sight. I froze, straining my ears. It stopped when I did, starting again only when I moved. Coincidence, I told myself. A deer, maybe, curious about the intruder. But the hairs on my arms stood up, and I gripped my walking stick tighter, its end whittled to a point from years of use. The footprints pressed on, now a cluster of 4 or 5 sets, circling each other in what looked like a ring around the rosy. Up ahead, the trees thinned into a small clearing, maybe 30 feet across, ringed by ancient stumps like forgotten gravestones. That's where they ended. The prints swirled into the clearing, looping tighter and tighter. Then, nothing. Mid-step, they just vanished, the last one half-formed, as if the walker had been plucked right out of the air. I circled the spot, scuffing the grass with my boot, but there was no sign of disturbance, no hole, no climbable tree nearby. The child, Tommy, gone without a trace. A deep chill settled over me then, not from the wind, but from inside, like the air in that clearing had gone stale, holding its breath. I called out again, "Tommy, you out here, son?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the woods. No answer. But as I turned to scan the tree line, something caught my eye. Fresh prints, right behind me, mimicking my own boot treads but lighter, as if whatever made them was testing the ground. Panic didn't hit all at once. It crept in slow, like fog rolling down the mountain. I knelt to touch one, damp earth, fresh as mine. How? I'd been alone, hadn't heard a thing. My mind spun. Maybe I'd looped back on myself without realizing? But no, the compass said north, and the sun's position confirmed it. I followed these new prints backward, thinking they'd lead me out, but they twisted, doubling over the old ones, creating loops that disoriented me further. The rustling came again, closer this time, from multiple directions. A twig snap here, a leaf crunch there. I whirled, stick raised, but saw only shadows dancing in the breeze. The air grew thicker, carrying that scent stronger now, musky, primal, like something that hadn't seen soap or society in years. I pushed on, heart pounding, the footprints leading me in circles. Time blurred, the light shifted as the afternoon wore on, shadows lengthening like fingers reaching out. My radio spat static when I tried it, no signal down in this hollow. Thirst nagged at me, but I didn't stop to drink, too focused on the path. Memories flooded in, unbidden, stories from my grandpop who ranged these woods before me. He'd talk about the haints, spirits or something worse, that lured folks with mimics, voices of loved ones, footprints of the lost. The mountains keep secrets, he'd say, his pipe smoke curling like ghosts. Some paths aren't meant for following. I shook it off, but doubt gnawed. What if those feral tales weren't just stories? What if something out here, people gone wild or worse, played games with intruders? Deeper in, the tracks led to an old cabin ruin, half collapsed under vines, its chimney a jagged tooth against the sky. I'd heard of it, abandoned since the 30s when a family vanished without trace. The prints skirted the edge as if wary, but one set veered inside. I hesitated, the doorway a black maw, but duty pulled me in. Inside, dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through cracks. Graffiti scarred the walls, initials, dates from decades ago, but something fresh. Small handprints in the dirt floor, child-sized, arranged in a circle. And in the center, a single blue sneaker, Velcro stab undone. Tommy's. My breath caught. How had it gotten here? I picked it up, fabric still warm, like it'd just been shed. Outside, the rustling intensified, circling the cabin. I burst out, shoe in hand, following the mimicking prints again. They looped wildly now, crossing streams, climbing ridges, always just ahead or behind. Exhaustion set in, legs burning, mind fogging. Night threatened, the sky bruising purple. I stumbled, twisting my ankle on a root, pain shooting up my leg. Sitting there, catching my breath, I heard it, a giggle, soft, childlike, from the brush. Tommy? Else, something that toyed with sounds, with tracks, drawing me in. I forced myself up, limping now, compass spinning uselessly. Wait, no, compasses don't spin unless... Magnetic anomaly, or my hands shaking. The giggles faded, replaced by silence so profound it rang in my ears. I followed what I thought was south, bushwhacking through thorns that tore my sleeves. Hours passed.
Trails, afternoons logging reports, evenings alone in my cabin with a bottle of bourbon to dull the edges. But the dread lingered, a low hum in my chest, like the mountains themselves were breathing down my neck. A week after the incident, I went back to that clearing. Couldn't help it. It pulled at me like a loose thread. The rain had washed everything clean, the ground a slick mud that sucked at my boots. The cabin ruin looked even more forlorn in the gray light, vines creeping higher as if reclaiming it inch by inch. I poked around inside again, flashlight sweeping the corners. The handprints were gone, smoothed over by water seeping through the roof. But in one corner, half buried in dirt, I found a scrap of cloth. Faded denim, torn like it had been caught on something sharp. Not Tommy's, too old, frayed at the edges. I pocketed it, not sure why. And as I stepped out, that rustle came again. Closer this time, from the tree line. I spun, beam cutting the gloom, and for a split second, I saw it. A shape, hunched, darting behind a trunk. Human? Animal? Gone before I could tell. My pulse raced. I hightailed it out, not looking back. Nights got worse after that. My cabin sits on the edge of the park, a simple A-frame with a wood stove and a porch overlooking the valley. Used to be peaceful, the kind of quiet that soothes a man. But now sounds crept in. At first, just the usual, owls hooting, coyotes yipping in the distance. Then one evening as I sat by the fire, a knock at the door. Soft, tentative, like a child's fist. I froze, glass halfway to my lips. No one comes out here unannounced. The road's too rough. I set the glass down, grabbed my shotgun from the rack, better safe, and eased the door open. Nothing, just the porch light casting long shadows, the woods beyond ink black. But on the step, a single footprint, bare, child-sized, toes pointed toward the door as if it had been standing there, waiting. I didn't sleep that night, sat up with the gun across my lap, ears straining. The knock didn't come again, but around 2 a.m. the giggles started, faint, drifting on the wind, like kids playing hide-and-seek in the dark. I stepped out onto the porch, breath fogging in the chill, and called out, "Who's there?" Silence swallowed my words. Then from the tree line, a reply, not words but an echo of my own voice, distorted, higher-pitched. "Who's there?" It mocked, followed by laughter that trailed off into the night. I slammed the door, barred it, and spent the rest of the hours staring at the flames, mind racing. Was it the wind, an animal, or something else, something that learned to mimic, to lure? The next day, I drove into Croft proper, needing human company. The hamlet's small, a post office, a church, a diner called Ma's Place, where the coffee's strong and the pie's homemade. I slid into a booth, ordered eggs and bacon, and tried to act normal. Old man Wilkins was at the counter, nursing his mug, his face weathered like old leather from years in the mines before they closed. He's the town storyteller, the one who keeps the legends alive. I nodded to him, and he ambled over, sliding in across from me. "Heard about the Hargrove boy," he said, voice gravelly. "You the one what went looking?" I nodded, poking in my food. "Strange business that. Reminds me of '72, when the Miller kids vanished. Found one shoe, nothing else. Folks said the wild ones took 'em." I leaned in, despite myself. "Wild ones? You mean the feral people?" He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Call 'em what you want. Been here longer than us, hiding in the hollers. Descendants of runaways, maybe, or Civil War deserters gone mad. They don't want company, but sometimes they play, leave tracks, sounds, lure the curious." He sipped his coffee, eyes distant. "My boss saw one once, ragged, eyes like goals, whispered his name, drew him in. He barely made it back. I wanted to dismiss it, but the footprint on my porch said otherwise. What do they want?" I asked. Wilkins shrugged. "Who knows? Territory, sport, or maybe just to remind us the mountains ain't ours." I left the diner unsettled, the scrap of denim burning a hole in my pocket. Drove to the library, a tiny room in the community center with shelves sagging under dusty books. Spent the afternoon poring over local history, disappearances dating back centuries from Cherokee times to now. Patterns emerged, kids going missing, turning up days later with tales of friends in the woods, adults vanishing for good, leaving odd tracks. One account from 1890 described prints that morphed as if the walker shed his humanity step by step. Chills ran down my spine. Was that what I'd seen? Shapes shifting, inviting. That evening, back at the cabin, I examined the cloth under lamplight. It had a button attached, brass, tarnished but with a faint engraving. U.S. Army, old style, Civil War era. How it had ended up there. As I turned it over, a sound outside, scratching, like nails on wood. I grabbed the shotgun again, hard hammering. The scratching moved around the cabin, circling slow. I peered through the window, but the glass fogged from my breath. Then, a thump on the roof, light footsteps padding above. Whatever it was small, agile. I fired a warning shot into the air from the porch, the boom echoing off the hills. Silence followed, then retreating rustles into the woods. Sleep evaded me again. Dreams came in fragments, following endless tracks, giggles turning to screams, shapes in the mist with elongated limbs, feral eyes gleaming. I woke sweat-soaked, dawn light filtering in. Decided I needed answers, or at least closure. Geared up, heavier pack, extra ammo, a GPS unit for backup, and headed back to the hollow. The trail felt familiar yet alien, trees whispering secrets as I passed.
Reached the clearing by noon, the air still heavy, expectant. I set up a trail cam, hidden in the brush, pointed at the spot where the prints vanished. If something came back, I'd have proof. Days passed without incident. Work kept me busy, tourists hiking, poachers to warn off, but the unease grew. Tommy's parents called once, thanking me, but when I asked about the boy, Mrs. Hargrove hesitated. He's fine, mostly, but he talks in his sleep now, about his friends, how they want to play again. That hit hard. Was it over, or just beginning? The trail cam footage, when I checked it a week later, was blank at first, just swaying branches, a deer passing. Then night vision kicked in, shapes moving, blurred, circling the clearing, humanoid, but hunched, limbs too long. They left prints, then erased them with sweeps of branches, and in one frame, clear as day, a face peering at the camera, pale, wild-eyed, mouth open in a silent laugh. I deleted the footage. Couldn't explain it, didn't want to, but the visits to my cabin increased. Footprints multiplied around the porch, some child-sized, others larger, clawed. Sounds at night, whispers mimicking my name, scratches etching patterns on the door, circles, loops. I nailed boards over windows, slept with lights on. Townfolk noticed my haggard look, asked if I was all right. I lied, said flu, but Wilkins cornered me one day. They're marking you, he said. Once they start, it's hard to stop. Best leave, Elias. The mountains claim their own. I considered it, packing up, heading to the city, leaving the woods behind. But roots run deep in Appalachia. This is home, cursed or not. Instead, I delved deeper into the legends. Found an old journal at the library, penned by a ranger in the 40s. He described similar encounters, tracks leading to nowhere, mimics in the night. They ain't ghosts, he wrote. Worse, living remnants, twisted by isolation. They breed dread, feed on it. His last entry, there at the door, God help me. Winter came early that year, snow blanketing the hills, muffling sounds. The visits lessened but never stopped. One blizzard night, power out, fire crackling. I heard the knock again, louder, insistent. I approached, gun ready, opened a crack. Nothing visible in the swirl of white, but on the step, a gift. Tommy's other sneaker, pristine as if never worn. Inside, a note scratched in crude letters. Come play. I burned it, but the invitation lingers. The woods call now, in dreams and waking. Footprints appear in snow outside, leading off into the trees, vanishing mid-step. I follow sometimes, just to the edge, then turn back. But each time, I go a little farther. The dread's part of me now, a companion in the isolation. In these mountains, some paths lead nowhere, but they pull you anyway. And one day, I fear, I won't return. The seasons turned, spring thawing the ground, bringing back the green and the unease. I cut back on ranging, sticking to desk work at the station, but the pull was there, magnetic. Reports trickled in, hikers hearing giggles, finding odd prints. I investigated one. A couple swore something followed them, mimicking their footsteps. Found the tracks, elongated, multiplied. Advised them to stay out. They laughed it off as imagination, but I knew. Summer brought heat, humidity cloaking the woods like a shroud. I ventured deep again, armed with recorder, hoping to capture proof. Set up camp near the clearing, fire low to avoid detection. Night fell, stars piercing the canopy. Hours passed in silence, then the rustles, close, encircling. I whispered into the mic, "Show yourselves." Laughter answered, my voice twisted back. Shapes flitted at the fire's edge, fleeting, feral. One paused, eyes reflecting flame, face gaunt, hair matted. Not animal, not quite human. It tilted its head, as if curious, then vanished. I packed at dawn, shaken. Back home, played the recording. My whisper, the laughs, then whispers, names, stories, sorrows of the lost. Voices layered, pleading, mocking. Join us, one said, clear as bell. I smashed the recorder. Fall returned, anniversary nearing. Tommy's family moved away. Heard the boy wouldn't go near woods. Good for him. Me, I'm tethered. The cabin feels smaller, walls closing in. Footprints now inside sometimes, on the floor, muddy, leading to my bed. I wake to breaths on my neck, invisible presences. Last week, I followed them deep. Hours in, found a new clearing. Bones scattered, human-looking, arranged in patterns. A warning, invitation. Turned back, but lost the way. Night fell, giggles guiding me out, or drew me closer. I don't know anymore. The dread's constant, sorrowful. What are they? Lost souls, feral kin, or the mountains themselves, alive, hungry? In Appalachia, questions linger, answers bury deep. I range still, but warily, knowing one step could lead nowhere, and when it does, who will follow my tracks? The uncertainty gnaws, a lingering fear that echoes in the hollows. Sorrow for the unmarked, confusion in the mimics. The mountains keep their secrets, and I'm part of them now, whether I want or not. If you venture here, listen close. The woods whisper, and sometimes they call your name.
My name's Elias Crow, and I've been a ranger in the backwoods around Vale for going on 15 years now. Vale ain't much of a town, more like a cluster of weathered houses clinging to the side of a mountain, with a general store that sells bait and bullets, and a church that's seen better days. Folks here don't talk much about the outside world. They got their own worries, like keeping the roof from leaking or making sure the deer don't strip the garden bare. Me, I came here after my divorce, figuring the quiet would suit me better than the noise of the city. Isolation has a way of settling into your bones, though, especially in these parts of Appalachia, where the trees grow so thick they swallow the sun by mid-afternoon. I've always been a solitary sort, preferring the company of the forest to people, but there's a difference between choosing alone and feeling it forced on you. The hollows now, they've got a reputation for amplifying that feeling, turning it into something you can't shake off with a hot cup of coffee or a long hike. I first heard about the hollows from old man Harlan, back when I was still green behind the ears. Harlan ran the bait shop down by the creek, his face all creased like birch bark, eyes sharp as a hawk's despite his age. We'd sit on his porch some evenings, him nursing a jar of moonshine while I stuck to black coffee, and he'd spin yarns about the land. "The hollows ain't just dips in the earth, boy," he'd say, his voice low and gravelly, like it was scraped from the rocks themselves. "They're places where the world thins out. Sound don't act right down there. You holler and it comes back at you wrong, too late, too soft, or sometimes not at all." He'd lean forward then, his breath smelling of fermented apples, and add, "And some say they call to folks, not with words, mind you, but with something deeper. The lonely ones hear it clearest." I laughed it off at first, chalking it up to old-timer superstition, the kind that sprouts up in places where winter lasts too long and the nights are pitch black. But over the years, I saw things that made me wonder. Hikers who'd wander off trail and turn up days later, babbling about echoes that weren't their own, or the way certain spots in the woods felt heavier, like the air was pressing down on you, urging you to stay put. Vales surrounded by these hollows, deep bowl-shaped depressions carved out by ancient rivers or glaciers, depending on who you ask. They're scattered through the national forest like scars, some small enough to jump across, others wide and steep-walled, dropping 100 feet or more into shadowed bottoms where the light barely penetrates. Black Hollow was one of the bigger ones, tucked away in the eastern ridge, about a day's hike from the nearest road. It got its name from the dark loam soil that never seemed to dry out, even in the heat of summer. Folks avoided it, not just because of the treacherous descent, but because of the stories. Legends of pharaoh people living down there, descendants of miners who got lost in the old shafts and never came back civilized, or whispers of forest spirits, though Harlan always scoffed at that, said it was the land itself that was alive, not some ghost. Me, I patrolled the edges often enough, checking for poachers or illegal camps, but I'd never gone all the way down. No reason to, until that day in the fall of 2021. It started ordinary enough. I was at the ranger station, a squat log building with a radio that crackled more than it spoke, and a map on the wall dotted with pins for reported sightings, mostly bears or the occasional cougar rumor. The leaves were turning, that fiery mix of red and gold that draws the tourists, but the air had a bite to it, hinting at the snows to come. My shift was winding down when the call came in over the radio. Static first, then a voice from dispatch down in the valley. "Elias, we've got a missing hiker, last seen heading toward Black Hollow, named Sarah Mills, mid-30s, solo trek. Family reported her overdue this morning." I felt a twinge in my gut, the kind you get when the woods decide to remind you who's in charge. Sarah Mills? I'd issued her permit 2 days prior. She seemed capable, gear looked solid, but she had that faraway look in her eyes, like she was running from something more than just city life. "Copy that," I radioed back. "I'll head out at first light." But sleep didn't come easy that night. My cabin was a mile from town, just me and the creak of the floorboards, the wind whispering through the pines outside. I lay there thinking about Harlan's stories, about how the hollows called to the lonely. Was I lonely? Divorced, no kids, folks long gone? Yeah, maybe, but I pushed it down, like always. Dawn broke gray and misty, the kind of morning where the fog clings to everything like a shroud. I geared up, backpack with water, rations, first aid, rope, flashlight, and my sidearm, just in case. The drive to the trailhead took an hour over rutted dirt roads, the truck jostling like it was trying to shake me loose. I parked at the old logging cut, where the path narrowed into a deer trail snaking through the underbrush. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the birds were quiet, too quiet, like they knew something I didn't. I radioed my position, then started the hike. It was familiar ground at first, tall oaks and hickories arching overhead, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the light into dappled patterns on the forest floor. Squirrels chattered from the limbs, and somewhere distant, a woodpecker drummed its rhythm. But as I neared the hollow, things changed. The trees thinned out, giving way to scrubby bushes and rocky outcrops. The ground sloped downward, gentle at first, then steeper,
forcing me to brace against trunks to keep my footing. By mid-morning, I reached the rim of Black Hollow. It yawned before me like a mouth in the earth, walls of jagged shale dropping sharply into the gloom below. Vegetation was sparse up here, mostly thorny brambles and stunted ferns clinging to the cracks. I paused, listening. The wind sighed through the trees behind me, but down in the hollow, nothing. No bird calls, no rustle of leaves, just a heavy silence that pressed against my eardrums. I cupped my hands and shouted, "Sarah? Sarah Mills? This is Ranger Crow." My voice echoed back, but not right away. It took a second too long, like it had to travel extra distance, and when it returned, it sounded muffled, distorted, like someone imitating me through a tin can. I shook it off, chalking it up to the acoustics, the way sound bounces in these depressions. Harlan had warned me after all. I uncoiled my rope, tied it to a sturdy oak at the rim, and started the descent. The walls were steeper than they looked. Loose gravel shifted under my boots, sending pebbles cascading down ahead of me. I rappelled in sections, planting my feet carefully, the rope biting into my palms through the gloves. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill, and my breath came in puffs that hung in the air. Halfway down, I stopped to catch my wind, clinging to a ledge no wider than my boot. Below, the bottom was still shrouded in shadow, a flat expanse maybe 100 yards across, dotted with boulders and patches of dark mud. I called out again, "Sarah?" This time the echo was even stranger, delayed by 3-4 seconds, and when it came back, it wasn't quite my voice. The tone was lower, almost pleading, like a whisper carried on the wind. A shiver ran down my spine, but I told myself it was the cold seeping through my jacket. "Keep moving, Elias. She's down there somewhere, probably twisted an ankle or got disoriented." It took another half hour to reach the bottom. My boots sunk into the soft earth with a squelch, the mud sucking at them like it didn't want to let go. The air down here was thicker, heavier, laced with the metallic tang of wet stone and something else. Decay, maybe, like old leaves rotting underfoot. The silence was absolute now. No wind, no insects buzzing, just the sound of my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I untied the rope, shouldered my pack, and started scanning the area. The hollow's floor was uneven, pocked with shallow pools of standing water that reflected the gray sky like dull mirrors. Boulders hunched like silent sentinels, their surfaces slick with moss. I moved slowly, calling out every few minutes, but each time the echoes grew more erratic. Sometimes they'd come back quick and sharp, other times languid and stretched, the syllables blending into something unintelligible. I found signs of her passage about 20 minutes in, a boot print in the mud, fresh enough to be from the last day or two, leading toward the center of the hollow. My pulse quickened. Maybe she was hurt, holed up behind one of these rocks. I followed the tracks, the ground growing softer, my steps leaving deep impressions. The light was fading faster than it should, the shadows from the walls lengthening across the floor even though it was only noon. That's when I first heard it. Not an echo, but something else. A faint call, soft as a sigh, coming from all around. "Elias?" My name, whispered on the air. I froze, skin prickling. It wasn't my voice, but it was familiar somehow, like a memory half remembered. I spun around, scanning the walls, the boulders, but there was nothing, just the empty hollow staring back. "Sarah?" I called, louder this time. The echo returned twisted. "Sarah? Elias?" Blended together, mocking me. Shaking my head, I pressed on. It had to be the acoustics, wind playing tricks through the crevices. But the call came again, stronger now, pulling at me like a current. "Elias? Come." It seemed to emanate from the ground itself, vibrating through my boots. The shadows were shifting now, not just lengthening, but moving in ways that defied the light. They pooled around the boulders, forming vague shapes, elongated figures that almost looked like arms reaching out, beckoning. I rubbed my eyes, blaming fatigue, but when I looked again, they were still there, wavering like heat haze. My heart was hammering now, a cold sweat breaking out under my shirt. This wasn't right. Hollows were just geological quirks, not whatever this was. Then I saw it, her pack, half buried in the mud near a cluster of rocks. Bright red nylon, unmistakable, the same one she'd had at the station. I hurried over, dropping to my knees to pull it free. It came up with a wet suck, empty except for a water bottle and a crumpled map. No sign of struggle, no blood, just abandoned like she'd set it down and walked away. As my fingers closed around the strap, the call intensified. A chorus now, my name repeated from every direction. "Elias? Elias? Stay." It burrowed into my head, not just sound, but a pull, an urge to go deeper into the hollow, toward a shadowed cleft in the far wall that I hadn't noticed before. Visions flickered at the edges of my sight, flashes of faces, old rangers I recognized from photos in the ranger archives, men who'd gone missing decades ago. They looked lost, their eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. One reached out, his hands skeletal, whispering, "Join us, the lonely." Panic surged through me, hot and sharp. I dropped the pack, scrambling back, but the mud clung, pulling at my legs like hands. The shadows thickened, coiling around my ankles, and the call became a roar in my mind, drowning out everything. I fought it, clawing my way toward the rope, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. The climb up was a blur, hands slipping on the rock, muscles burning, the call fading but never quite gone. When I finally hauled myself over the rim, collapsing on the dry leaves, the silence returned, broken only by my sobbing breaths. I radioed for backup, but by the time they arrived, there was no trace of Sarah, no pack, nothing but my word. That was 4 years ago, and Sarah Mills was never found. They searched for weeks, but Black Hollow gave up nothing. Folks in Vale whisper about it now, adding it to the legends. Me, I still patrol, but I steer clear of the hollows. Some nights in my cabin when the wind howls through the pines, I hear it again, a faint call, my name on the breeze. Is it real, or just the loneliness echoing back? In Appalachia, the land doesn't let go easy. It calls to you, and once it does, you're never truly free.
My name's Harlan Whitaker, and I reckon I've been carrying this weight long enough that it's time to set it down, even if just by speaking it aloud. Folks in Coleridge know me as the quiet ranger who keeps to the ridges, the one who nods hello at the general store, but don't linger for gossip. I've lived in these mountains all my 52 years, born in a little holler outside town, raised in a cabin my daddy patched together from scrap timber and stubbornness. Coleridge ain't much anymore, just a scatter of weathered houses along a creek, a shuttered company store, and the Methodist church that still rings its bell on Sunday, even though half the pews stay empty. Once it was alive with men going underground every dawn, coming up black-faced at dusk, coughing their lives away for a paycheck that barely kept the lights on. The mines closed one by one starting in the 80s, and the town shrunk like a shirt washed too many times. Now the only thing that grows here is kudzu over the tipples and silence over everything else. I took the ranger job back in '98 after my wife Clara passed. Lung cancer, same as took my daddy and most of his generation, even though she never worked a day underground. I needed something to fill the hours, something that kept me moving through the woods instead of sitting in that empty cabin listening to the clock tick. The Forest Service gave me a badge, a truck, and miles of abandoned shafts to watch over. Folks warned me early on, stay clear of the old entrances, Harlan. Some places the mountain don't want visitors. I nodded like I always do, but I figured I knew these hills better than most. I'd played in the slate dumps as a boy, fished the acid-orange creeks that ran from the deep mines, heard my uncles tell stories about lights seen in sealed portals, will-o'-the-wisps they called them, or sometimes the lamps of dead miners still walking their shifts. I listened, smiled, and filed it away with the other tall tales you hear growing up Appalachian. Life's hard enough without borrowing trouble from ghosts. But the mountains have long memories, and they don't always keep them to themselves. It started slow, the way a cough starts in a miner, one rattle that you ignore until it's rattling you. Spring of 2016, I was patrolling the north slope above Coleridge where the Black Diamond No. 3 used to operate. The entrance had been sealed since '89 after a roof fall killed 6 men, one of them my Uncle Ray. They bulldozed dirt over the portal, put up a chain-link fence with warning signs, and let the vines take it. I drove past that fence twice a week for years, never saw anything but rust and briars. Then, one April evening, just as the sun was bleeding out behind the ridge, I caught a flicker. Not a reflection, too steady for that, too deep inside the dark. A soft yellow glow, like a lantern left burning, pulsing faint behind the piled earth. I stopped the truck, rolled the window down, and stared until my eyes watered. It dimmed, then brightened again, almost like breathing. I told myself it was kids with flashlights messing around, even though the gate was padlocked and the road overgrown. I radioed it in as possible trespass, made a note to check closer the next day. That night in the cabin, with the wood stove popping and the wind moaning through the cracks, I dreamed of my Uncle Ray calling my name from somewhere deep and black. The next morning I hiked up with bolt cutters and a mag light. The fence was intact, no footprints in the mud, but when I rounded the berm I saw it again, that glow seeping through cracks in the fill like light through a grave. It wasn't bright, more like the last ember in a dying fire, but steady. I stood there a long minute, feeling the old pull of these hills, the way they tug at blood that's been spilled into them. My daddy always said the mountain takes what it's owed, sooner or later. I should have turned around right then. Instead, I cut the lock, pulled the gate open just enough to slip through, and stepped into the drift mouth where the air turned cold and damp in a single breath. The first thing that hits you in an old mine is the smell, cold dust and wet stone, with something metallic underneath, like blood left too long in a bucket. The timbers at the entrance were rotted as sagging under their own weight, and water dripped steady from the roof like a clock you can't shut off. I swept my flashlight ahead, the beam cutting pale tunnels through the dark. The tracks were still there, rusted rails disappearing into nothing.
I told myself I was just doing my job, checking for squatters, making sure no kids had broken in and risked a collapse. But 20 yards in, the glow appeared again, farther down the main haulageway, bobbing gentle like someone carrying a lamp. My heart gave a lurch. I called out, "Park service, show yourself." My voice came back flat and dead, soaked up by the coal seams. The light didn't stop, just kept moving deeper, slow and deliberate. I followed. The air grew heavier with every step, pressing on my chest the way it does before a thunderstorm. My boots crunched on slate fallen from the roof, and every few yards I passed side entries branching off into black nothing. I knew this mine from the maps, knew where the old rooms were worked out, where the methane pockets lingered, where the fall had happened that took Uncle Ray. I shouldn't have gone past the first crosscut, but that light stayed just far enough ahead to keep me moving, like it knew exactly how much rope to give. Sometimes it dimmed until I thought it was gone, then flared again, brighter, almost warm. I started hearing things too, not loud, just underneath the drip in my breathing. Murmurs, low voices overlapping, the way men talk in a heading when they're setting timbers or waiting on the man trip. I caught snippets. "Tell Clara I'm sorry." Roofs talking again. "Just one more ton." Familiar cadences, the slow drawl of men I'd grown up around. My skin prickled. I told myself it was air moving through the old ventilation shafts, carrying echoes from outside, but I knew better. Sound don't travel like that underground. Deeper in, the glow split, 2 lights now, then 3, drifting along parallel entries like a crew walking to the face. My flashlight started acting strange, dimming even with fresh batteries, so I relied more on their light. It was soft, yellow, the color of the old carbide lamps the men used before electric cap lamps. I passed a fallen roof where ribs had snapped like matchsticks, and for a moment I thought I saw boot prints in the dust, small, deliberate, heading the same direction. My mouth went dry. I'd been down enough mines to know dust settles thick and stays put unless something moves through it. I kept going. The haulageway opened into a wider room, what they call an air course, and that's where the lights gathered. They hung in the air maybe 10 feet ahead, half a dozen of them, floating steady like lanterns on a calm night. Between them, shapes moved, tall, thin, indistinct at first in the dust that swirled, though there was no wind. I raised my light and the beam caught faces. Not clear, not solid, more like memories projected on coal smoke. Men in coveralls, helmets tilted, faces blackened with dust the way miners always looked coming off shift. I knew some of them. Uncle Ray was there, younger than I remembered, eyes wide and fixed on me. Beside him stood Davy McCoy, who'd gone in with him that day in '89, and old Mr. Luster, who taught me to fish when I was knee-high. They didn't speak, just looked at me with something between sorrow and longing, mouths moving slow like they were trying to warn me of something I already knew too late. The air turned colder than any April I'd ever felt, cold enough that my breath plumed white. The murmurs rose, overlapping, urgent now, names, fragments of prayers, someone coughing wet and ragged. The lights brightened, washing everything in that sickly yellow, and the figures stepped closer. Not walking exactly, more like gliding, the dust parting around them. I saw their eyes clear then, pleading, not angry, not threatening, just terribly, terribly sad, like they'd been waiting all these years for someone to come tell their families they weren't coming home. My legs locked. I wanted to speak, to say Uncle Ray's name, to ask forgiveness for not going to his funeral because I was too mad at the company, too mad at God, but my throat closed up and all that came out was a rasp. Then the lights moved toward me fast, not running, more like the whole room inhaled and pulled them forward. The cold wrapped around me like wet cotton, cold enough that my breath plumed white. The voices swelled into a single wordless cry, the sound a mine makes when it's about to come down on you. Panic snapped me loose. I turned and ran. I don't remember much of the flight back, just the slap of my boots on the slate, the flashlight beam jerking wild, the lights keeping pace behind me like a crew following the man trip out. They stayed just at the edge of sight, bobbing, flickering, never quite catching up but never falling behind. The air pushed at my back, thick with dust and that metallic taste of fear. My lungs burned, legs pumped until I thought they'd give out, and still the glow chased me through every crosscut, every bend. I burst out the portal into twilight and slammed into the gate, scrambled through and pulled it shut behind me. The lights stopped at the threshold, hovering just inside the dark like they couldn't cross running water or daylight, or whatever boundary keeps the dead down there. I sat in the truck a long time, shaking so hard the keys rattled in my hand. When I finally radioed in, all I said was, "Check the old Black Diamond, nothing but bad air." Couldn't bring myself to speak the rest. Drove home with windows down even though it was cold, trying to air out the coal dust I still felt on my skin. They never found proof, of course. I went back a week later with the county sheriff and a couple volunteers. The gate was locked again, by me, though I don't remember doing it. And inside, nothing but dark and silence. No glow, no footprints, no voices, just the smell of the mountain breathing slow. The sheriff clapped me on the shoulder and said I must have seen reflected sunlight or methane fire. I nodded like a good ranger should. But some nights when the wind comes down off the ridge carrying that sharp coal smell even though the tipples are long gone, I see them again, faint yellow lights moving along the abandoned roads, drifting toward the sealed entrances. And sometimes, parked on patrol with the engine off, I hear murmurs through the vents, low and patient, saying names I recognize. My name too, now and then, soft as a promise. The mines remember every man they took, and they light the way for the next ones who feel that pull. The lonely, the grieving, the ones carrying guilt heavier than any coal load. I stay away from the portals now, keep to the ridges where the sun still reaches. But I know one of these days the lights will come farther out, or I'll feel too tired to keep driving past. The mountain always collects what's owed. And in towns like Coleridge, the dark has patience older than any of us.
My name's Jonah Hale, and I've spent most of my 57 years within spitting distance of Oakmont, a little settlement tucked so deep in the folds of the Smokies that the mail only comes 3 times a week, and the cell signal is more rumor than fact. Oakmont ain't on most maps, just a cluster of weathered cabins along a gravel road that turns to mud when the rains come, a one-room post office that doubles as the gossip hub, and a church whose steeple leans a little more every year. Folks here make do with gardens, hunting, and whatever odd jobs the Forest Service or the county throws our way. We don't talk much to outsiders, and we talk even less about certain parts of the woods. I reckon that's why I'm telling this now, because if I don't say it out loud, it'll keep rooting deeper inside me until there ain't room for anything else. I was born in the same cabin I live in today, a squat log affair my granddaddy built back when timber was still king and men felled the big ones by hand. My daddy added the tin roof and the lean-to porch where I still sit most evenings, watching the mist settle over the ridges. Ma died young, birthing my little sister, who didn't make it either, and Daddy followed her 10 years later when a widowmaker branch caught him square while he was cutting firewood. After that, it was just me, rattling around in that cabin like a marble in a tin can. I took work where I could, logging for a spell, then road maintenance for the county, and finally as a part-time caretaker for the national forest land that borders Oakmont. Mostly it meant checking trails, clearing blowdowns after storms, reporting poachers or illegal stills. It suited me fine. The woods don't ask questions, and they don't leave you neither. We've always had stories here about the trees remembering. Old women would say it when a big oak got struck by lightning and bled sap like blood, said the tree was crying for something it had seen. Or when a hiker went missing and the dogs couldn't pick up a scent, folks would mutter that the forest had taken its due, and the roots held the secret. I listened the way you listen to rain on a tin roof, steady, familiar, nothing to get worked up about. But there was one tree in particular that carried more weight than the others. Folks called it the witness oak, though never to its face, so to speak. It stood alone in a small clearing about 3 miles up the old logging trace, a massive thing with a trunk wider than 3 men could link arms around, and branches that spread like a storm cloud frozen in time. Nobody logged near it, nobody built a still in its shadow, and nobody carved their sweetheart's initials in its bark. Kids dared each other to touch it on moonless nights, but even the rowdiest came back quiet. I'd passed it hundreds of times on patrol, always giving it a respectful berth. The clearing around it felt different, quieter, heavier, like the air itself was listening. Moss grew thick on the north side, and the ground was soft with centuries of leaf mold. Birds nested everywhere else, but not there. I never lingered. But in the summer of 2023, a storm changed that. It came in late July, one of those mountain tempests that builds all day until the sky bruises black and the wind starts screaming through the gaps like a warning you're too stubborn to heed. Thunder rolled down the hollows like artillery, and lightning stitched the ridges white. I sat on my porch watching it come, coffee going cold in my hand, thinking about how Daddy always said a big storm scrubbed the land clean. By morning, the creek was roaring bank full, branches littered the road, and half the county was without power. I pulled on my boots and headed out to check the trails, chainsaw in the back of my truck, expecting a day of cutting blowdowns. The old logging trace was a mess. Pines snapped like matchsticks, poplars uprooted and flung across the path. I worked steady, sweat mixing with sawdust, the smell of fresh-cut wood sharp in the damp air. Around noon, I reached the clearing where the witness oak stood. The storm had hit it hard. One massive limb had sheared off high up, crashing to the ground and taken smaller branches with it. The great tree still stood, but it looked wounded, pale wood exposed where the bark had torn away in long strips. Sap oozed slow from the brakes, thick and amber in the gray light. I shut off the chainsaw and just stared. Something about the way the limb had fallen felt deliberate, like the tree had shrugged off a burden it had carried too long. That's when I saw the carvings. They were revealed in the torn places where the outer bark had peeled back like old skin. Names, dates, scratched deep into the heartwood decades ago and grown over until the storm stripped them bare again. I stepped closer, boots sinking in the soft earth, and ran my fingers over the letters. The wood was cool, almost damp, and the grooves felt sharp despite the years. Elias Crow, 1947. Mary Whitaker, 1953. Thomas Hale, 1968. My breath caught on that last one. Thomas Hale was my daddy's brother, my Uncle Tom, who'd gone hunting one November morning and never came home. Search parties looked for weeks. They found his rifle leaning against a beach 2 ridges over, but no sign of him. Folks figured bear or a fall off a cliff, though no body ever turned up. Seeing his name there, carved neat and deliberate, sent a chill through me deeper than the morning air. There were more names, dozens of them spiraling up the trunk where the bark had split. Some I recognized, local folks who'd vanished over the years. Others were strangers, but the dates stretched back to the 1920s. All of them people who'd gone into these woods and didn't come out. I stood there a long time, tracing the letters with my fingertips, feeling the tree's slow pulse beneath the wounds. The clearing was silent. No birds, no wind, just the distant drip of water from the storm. I told myself it was old vandalism, kids playing at being spooky, but the depth of the cuts and the way the bark had grown over them said different. These marks were made long ago, when the tree was younger, and it had carried them hidden until now. I don't know why I did it, but I pulled my folding saw from my belt and cut a small sample from one of the torn strips, a piece no bigger than my palm, with part of a name still visible. Evidence, I told myself, something to show the sheriff or the Forest Service, proof that somebody had been carving up this tree for a century. But deep down I knew I wanted to hold a piece of whatever secret it was keeping. I wrapped the sample in a bandana and tucked it in my pocket, then cleared the fallen limb off the trace and headed home as the sun sank red behind the ridges. That night the tapping started. I'd built a small fire against the evening chill, eaten a bowl of beans, and settled into my chair with a glass of corn liquor to quiet the day's ache in my back. The cabin was dark, except for the firelight dancing on the log walls, shadows long and restless. Around midnight the wind picked up, rattling the loose tin on the porch roof. Then came the tapping, soft at first, like a branch brushing the window pane. I didn't think much of it until it kept time, deliberate. Tap, 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 tap. I got up, carried the lantern to the window, and looked out. Nothing but blackness and the sway of trees. The tapping stopped as soon as I moved the curtain. I told myself it was squirrels or a raccoon on the roof, went back to my chair. But an hour later it started again, closer, right against the glass. Tap, 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 tap. I opened the door, stepped onto the porch with the shotgun just in case. The night was still now, no wind, stars sharp overhead. Nothing moved. Yet the tapping came again, from the big hemlock beside the cabin, branches scraping a siding in a rhythm too steady for chance. I shone the light up into the needles, saw the limb moving slow, back and forth, though there wasn't breath enough of air to stir a leaf. My skin crawled. I went back inside, barred the door like I hadn't done since I was a boy afraid of panthers. Sleep didn't come easy. When it finally took me, I dreamt of roots, thick, pale roots pushing through black soil, wrapping around bones, skulls with empty sockets staring up, hands reaching, and voices, faint and dry like leaves skittering across frost. Jonah, you touched, you saw, remember. I woke before dawn, sweat-soaked, the sample still in my pocket where I'd forgotten to take it out. The next day I drove into Oakmont proper, meaning to show the wood to old Miss Carver, who knew every story ever told in these parts. She ran the post office and had a memory sharper than a skinning knife. But when I pulled up, she was on the porch sweeping, and the look she gave me when I climbed out stopped me cold. "Jonah Hale," she said, voice low, "you been up to the witness, ain't you?
I hadn't told a soul. I asked her how she knew. She pointed at my pocket with the broom handle. That wood's got a smell, sweet and sour both, like sap gone bad. I can smell it from here. I pulled out the sample, and her face went pale as milk. Put it back, boy. Put it back where you found it, for it puts you where the others went. I asked her straight, what did the tree remember? She glanced around like somebody might be listening from the trees, then motioned me inside. Over coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, she told me what her granny had told her. Back in the old days, before the railroad came, there'd been a man, a preacher gone wrong, some said, or a trapper gone mad. He took folks who wandered too far alone, never many, just enough that people noticed. Took them to that clearing, did what he did, and buried them shallow under the oak's roots. The tree drank deep, grew strong, and kept the names he carved as markers. Over generations the story faded, but the tree held on, and if you disturbed it, cut it, burned it, or took a piece, it would remind you. I laughed it off, said it was just old superstition, but that night the tapping was louder, branches against every window, scraping like fingernails trying to get in, and underneath it whispers, dry, rustling, coming through the cracks around the door.
My name's Caleb Reed, and I've been walking these mountains around Misty Hollow since I was old enough to carry a pack without complaining. Misty Hollow ain't much more than a wide spot in the road where two creeks meet, maybe 20 houses scattered along the valley floor, a volunteer fire hall that doubles as the community center, and a little country store where you can buy milk, ammo, and gossip in equal measure. The rest is forest, thick and ancient, climbing steep up the ridges until the trees give way to rock and sky. Folks here are quiet, hard-working, and private. We don't take kindly to strangers asking too many questions, and we don't volunteer answers unless there's good reason. I reckon that's why I've never told this story straight through to anyone, not even to Ruth Ann down at the store, or to Pastor Wilkes when he came by with a casserole after Mama passed. Some things you carry alone, because speaking them aloud feels like inviting them closer. I came to the ranger job natural. My daddy was a forester before the mills shut down, and he taught me how to read the land, the way a bent twig means deer past recent, how moss grows thicker on the north side, how the wind shifts before rain. After he died in a logging accident when I was 19, I drifted a while, worked construction down in Knoxville, even tried community college for a semester, but the mountains pulled me back. Before a service hired me in 2005, gave me a green uniform and a district that covered most of the hollow and the high ridges around it. It was lonely work, but I liked the solitude. My cabin sat a mile up a dirt track from town, just me and the wood stove and the sound of the creek at night. I never married. The one girl I thought might change that left for nursing school in Asheville and never looked back. I told myself I didn't mind. The woods were company enough. We lose things in these mountains. Dogs mostly, sometimes hikers, once in a great while a local who knows better but wanders off anyway. Usually they turn up, a hound treed by a bear, a tourist twisted an ankle, an old-timer asleep under a hemlock with a half-empty jar. But some don't. There's a list in the station drawer of names going back 50 years, folks the searches never found. One name sat heavier than the rest, Ranger Elias Thorne. He'd been my predecessor, worked the district from '89 till he vanished in the fall of 2012. Good man by all accounts, quiet and capable, kept to himself like me. One October morning he radioed in that he was checking a report of smoke up near Devil's Gap, then nothing. Truck found parked neat at the trailhead, door unlocked, coffee still warm in the thermos. No note, no struggle, just gone. They searched 2 weeks solid, dogs, helicopters, volunteers on foot, found nothing but his hat hanging on a laurel branch a mile in. After that, the job opened up and I took it. I tried not to think about Elias overmuch. Bad luck to dwell on the missing, Mama always said. But sometimes, on long patrols when the fog rolled thick and the ridges disappeared, I'd feel him out there, like a shadow keeping pace just beyond the trees. It started with a dog, the way these things often do. October 2018, 6 years after Elias vanished. Mrs. Lottie Green called the station late one afternoon, voice trembling over the landline. Her little beagle, Daisy, had slipped her collar that morning while Lottie hung laundry and hadn't come to supper. Daisy was old, half-deaf,
prone to wandering but always turned up by dark. This time she didn't. Lottie was widowed, lived alone in a trailer at the end of the hollow, and Daisy was all the company she had left. I told her I'd go look at first light. She thanked me like I'd already found the dog, and I could hear the tears she was trying to swallow. Dawn broke gray and damp, the kind of morning where the mist clings to everything and the sun never quite burns through. I loaded my pack, water, snacks, first aid kit, flare gun, radio, pulled on my rain jacket, and drove as far as the road allowed before hoofing it up the old fire trace toward Lottie's place. The forest was quiet, leaves sodden underfoot, the air heavy with that earthy smell that comes before real rain. I called Daisy's name every few minutes, voice falling flat in the fog. No bark answered. At Lottie's trailer, I picked up the dog's trail easy enough, little paw prints in the soft dirt behind the clothesline, heading straight into the thick laurel slick that borders the creek. I followed. The fog thickened as I climbed. It does that in Misty Hollow, rolls down off the ridges and pools in the draws until you can't see 20 feet. Sounds get strange too, muffled, directionless, like the world's wrapped in cotton. I'd walked these woods and worse, so I kept steady, whistling now and then, calling Daisy girl, come on. An hour in, the trail narrowed to deer path, rhododendron closing overhead until it felt like walking through a tunnel. That's when I heard the first answer. It was faint, carried on the damp air, a whine, high and plaintive, the way a lost dog cries. I stopped, listened. It came again, further up the slope. Daisy, I called. The whine shifted, became something else, not quite a bark, more like a word stretched thin. Sometimes the woods don't always stay lost. Sometimes they search. And when the fog comes, they mistake the living for one of their own, reaching out with cold hands to guide you home. I still wear the jacket, still walk the trails, but I never go up that slope when the mist is thick. Some invitations you only get once, and I'm afraid one day I'll be lonely enough or tired enough to follow.
I've been a park ranger in these parts for nigh on 20 years now, working out of the little station just outside Benville, a speck of a town tucked deep in the folds of the Appalachians, where the roads twist like rattlesnakes and the mountains seem to lean in close, listening. Folks around here know me as Harlan Tate, and I've spent most of my life patrolling these forests, fixing washed-out trails, pulling stuck vehicles out of mud, and making sure the tourists don't do anything too foolish. I've seen black bears at 10 paces, broken up illegal camps, even carried a heart attack victim 2 miles down a ridge on my back. Nothing much rattles me anymore, or so I thought, until the summer of 2024, when I drove Loop Road for what I figured was routine maintenance and ended up somewhere I still can't rightly explain. It wasn't ghosts or monsters, nothing you could put a name to easy. It was just the road itself, bending in a way roads ain't supposed to, folding time and distance back on itself until a man don't know which way is forward and which way is gone. It started simple enough, the way these things always do. Late June, hot and sticky, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer off the asphalt and the cicadas scream like they're warning you off. Dispatch crackled over the radio in the truck around midday. 2 separate calls about vehicles broken down on Loop Road, an old service road that cuts through the back end of the National Forest. Loop Road's not on most maps. It's a narrow gravel and asphalt stretch put in decades ago for logging and fire access, maybe 12 miles long if you measure it straight, looping from the main highway near Benville around a ridge and spitting you back out a few miles farther up the valley. Locals avoid it mostly. Too many washouts, too many sharp drop-offs with no guardrail, but it's my job to keep it passable. Both callers said their engines just quit, no warning, and when they tried to walk out, they kept ending up back at their own vehicles, no matter which direction they went. One was a young couple from Ohio on a camping trip. The other was an older fella hauling firewood. I told dispatch I'd head out, check on him, maybe tow if needed. I took the old Ford F-250, the one with the winch and the light bar, loaded up tools, extra fuel, water, the usual. Drove out Route 17 until the pavement narrowed and the trees closed in overhead, then turned onto Loop Road where the faded sign still reads Forest Service Access Only in peeling green paint. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Usually there's birdsong, wind in the laurel, something. But that day the woods felt muffled, like someone had turned the volume down on the world. Gravel crunched under the tires as I eased along, watching the odometer. Mile 1, mile 2, nothing unusual. Past the big hemlock that got struck by lightning a few years back, its trunk split white like bone. Mile 3, mile 4, I radioed in my position, got static mostly. Signals always spotty in the hollows. Around mile 5, I spotted the first vehicle, the older man's pickup, a rusted Chevy with a load of split oak in the bed, parked crooked on the shoulder like he'd just rolled to a stop. No sign of the driver. I pulled up, killed the engine, stepped out. Heat pressed down heavy, sweat already beating on my neck. Called his name, Mr. Ketchum, dispatch had said, but only echoes answered. Walked a circle around the truck. Hood cold, battery dead maybe, but no smoke, no smell of burnt wiring. Keys still in the ignition. On the dash, his phone, screen cracked, showing a half-dialed 911 call from hours earlier. I tried my radio again, nothing but hiss. Figured I'd come back for the truck after finding the people. Kept driving. Mile 6, mile 7, the road curved gentle through a stand of poplars, sunlight strobing through the leaves. Then I saw it. The lightning-struck hemlock again. Same split trunk, same charred bark. I slowed, confused. Hadn't I just passed this? Odometer said mile 8 now, but the tree was identical, right down to the surveyor's ribbon I'd tied on it last spring, faded orange flapping in the breeze. A cold prickle ran up my arms despite the heat. I told myself I'd misremembered, that these old trees all look alike after a while. Kept going. Mile 9. The road dipped into a hollow where fog sometimes pools, even on clear days. Came around the bend and there was Mr. Ketchum's Chevy again. Same position, same load of firewood. My stomach dropped like I'd stepped off a ledge. I slammed the brakes, gravel spraying. Sat there a minute, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at that truck I'd just left behind. Odometer read mile 10. Impossible. Loop Road don't double back on itself like that. I've driven it 100 times. I got out slow, walked up to the Chevy. Everything exactly the same. Keys in ignition, phone on dash, but now the hood was warm, like it had been driven recent. My own boot prints from earlier were still in the dust beside it, fresh. I looked back the way I'd come, my tire tracks leading right up to where I stood. No turnaround, no side road, just the same stretch I'd already covered. I climbed back in my truck, heart starting to thud heavy. Told myself mechanical failure, maybe the odometer was glitchy. Turned around, had to check on Ketchum, and headed back the way I'd come. Past the hemlock again, ribbon fluttering, then the poplars, then sure enough, the entrance sign, Forest Service Access Only. But the highway beyond it wasn't there, just more gravel road stretching into trees. I stopped, rubbed my eyes, checked the GPS on my phone, no signal, screen just spinning. Odometer climbing again, mile 2, mile 3. The woods looked the same, smelled the same, even the light slanting through the canopy at the same angle it had an hour ago. Time felt stuck. That's when I heard the first voice, faint, coming from the dash fence like someone talking through the AC, even though it was off. A man's voice, cracked and tired. Engine just quit, no reason, been walking hours. I froze, hand on the wheel. It was Mr. Ketchum's voice. I recognized the mountain drawl from the dispatch description, but he wasn't in the truck with me. The voice kept going, overlapping itself like a recording stuck on repeat. Tried walking back, keep ending up here. Anybody hearing this? Then another voice cut in, younger, female. We'd been out here all day. Phone's dead. Hello? The couple from Ohio. Static fuzzed between words, but clear enough to raise the hairs on my neck. I smacked the dash, turned the key off and on. Voices kept coming, faint but persistent, like echoes trapped in the metal. I drove faster now, gravel pinging the undercarriage. Wanted off this road, any direction. Past the hemlock again, the Chevy again, empty both times. Odometer ticking up steady, but the scenery never changed beyond the same few miles. Sun hung in the same spot, not moving west like it should. My watch said 2:15 p.m., same as when I turned onto the road. Stomach knotted tight. I tried the radio every few minutes, nothing but faint voices bleeding through, more of them now. Different accents, different years maybe. A woman crying softly. Kids are scared, we just wanted to see the falls. A man cursing, voice hoarse. Third time past the same damn tree. All of them sounding like they were right there in the cab with me, breath fogging the inside of the windshield though it was 90 degrees out. I pulled over after what felt like hours, though the clock hadn't budged. Got out, legs shaky, and started walking along the shoulder, figuring boots on ground might break whatever this was. Left the truck running, hazards blinking. Walked steady, counting paces. Past the hemlock, the poplars, the entrance sign again, but no highway. Just the road curving back into forest. Kept going. Sweat soaked my shirt, thirst clawing my throat, though I'd drunk water not long before. The voices followed, fainter now outside the truck, but still there. Carried on the still air. Please, curses. Someone singing an old hymn off key like trying to stay calm. Birds still silent, no wind, no insects buzzing. Just my boots on gravel and those trapped voices drifting.
Hours or minutes, I couldn't tell. Later I came upon my own truck again, hazard still blinking, door hanging open like I just stepped out, tire tracks fresh behind it, my footprints leading right up to where I stood now. I stared at them a long time, chest tight, realizing I'd walked miles and ended up exactly where I started. The woods pressed close, rhododendron thickets blocking any sight deeper in. No trail out, no ridge to climb for signal, just the road, bending gentle, innocent looking under the unmoving sun. I sat on the tailgate, head in hands, trying to think clear. Heat mirage shimmered off the hood. The voices from the vents had gone quiet, but when I climbed back in, they started again, now including my own voice, recorded somehow from earlier radio calls. Dispatch, this is Tate on Loop Road, checking breakdowns. Hearing myself pleading into static sent ice through my veins. I killed the engine, sat in the sudden silence, thought about the stories old-timers tell around Benville, roads that don't go where maps say, hollows where compasses spin, places the mountains keep for themselves. Always laughed them off as moonshine tales, but here I was, caught in one. Dusk should have come, but the light stayed that same flat afternoon gold. Thirst worsened. My water bottle was half empty already, though I'd refilled it that morning. I started walking again, this time opposite the loop's usual direction, figuring maybe the curve only bent one way. Past the same landmarks over and over. Hemlock, poplars, Shine, Chevy, my truck. Each time the vehicles looked more abandoned, dust thicker, leaves collecting on hoods, though no wind blew. The voices grew overlapping, a chorus of the stuck. Questions, prayer, someone laughing too long like they'd cracked. I kept my eyes down after a while, focusing on my boots, one foot then the other, trying not to count how many times I circled. Night never fell, but a dimness crept in, like clouds covering the sun, though the sky stayed clear. Exhaustion hit hard, legs burning, mind fogging. I stopped at my truck again, climbed in, laid the seat back, closed my eyes just to rest them. When I opened them, the dashboard clock still read 2:15, but the fuel gauge had dropped a quarter tank. Time wasn't moving, but something was burning. The voices murmured softer now, almost conversational, like folks who had accepted their fate. One said my name, Harlan. You out there, Harlan? My own voice again, but older, wearier, like years had passed in that single afternoon. I don't know what made me do it, panic, instinct, desperation, but I got out, left the truck idling, and started walking straight into the woods instead along the road. Pushed through laurel thickets that clawed my uniform, branches snapping back at my face. No path, just uphill toward what I hoped was the ridge. Thorns tore skin, sweat stung eyes, but I kept going, lungs heaving. The voices faded behind me, replaced by my own ragged breathing and the crack of twigs underfoot. Hours or minutes, I couldn't tell. Later I came upon my own truck again, hazard still blinking, door hanging open like I just stepped out. Tire tracks fresh behind it, my footprints leading right up to where I stood now. I stared at them a long time, chest tight, realizing I'd walked miles and ended up exactly where I started. The woods pressed close, rhododendron thickets blocking any sight deeper in. No trail out, no ridge to climb for signal. Just the road, bending gentle, innocent looking under the unmoving sun. I sat on the tailgate, head in hands, trying to think clear. Heat mirage shimmered off the hood. The voices from the vents had gone quiet, but when I climbed back in, they started again, now including my own voice, recorded somehow from earlier radio calls. Dispatch, this is Tate on Loop Road, checking breakdowns. Hearing myself pleading into static sent ice through my veins. I killed the engine, sat in the sudden silence. Thought about the stories old-timers tell around Benville, roads that don't go where maps say, hollows where compasses spin, places the mountains keep for themselves. Always laughed them off as moonshine tales, but here I was, caught in one. Night never fell, but a dimness crept in, like clouds covering the sun, though the sky stayed clear. Exhaustion hit hard, legs burning, mind fogging. I stopped at my truck again, climbed in, laid the seat back, closed my eyes just to rest them. When I opened them, the dashboard clock still read 2:15, but the fuel gauge had dropped a quarter cat. Time wasn't moving, but something was burning. The voices murmured softer now, almost conversational, like folks who had accepted their fate. One said my name, Harlan. You out there, Harlan? My own voice again, but older, wearier, like years had passed in that single afternoon. I don't know what made me do it, panic, instinct, desperation, but I got out, left the truck idling, and started walking straight into the woods instead along the woods. Pushed through laurel thickets that clawed my uniform, branches snapping back at my face. No path, just uphill toward what I hoped was the ridge. Thorns tore skin, sweat stung eyes, tore skin, stung eyes, but I kept going, lungs heaving. The voices faded behind me, replaced by my own ragged breathing and the crack of twigs underfoot. Hours or minutes, I couldn't tell. Later I came upon my own truck again, hazard still blinking, door hanging open like I just stepped out. Tire tracks fresh behind it, my footprints leading right up to where I stood now. I stared at them a long time, chest tight, realizing I'd walked miles and ended up exactly where I started. The woods pressed close, rhododendron thickets blocking any sight deeper in. No trail out, no ridge to climb for signal.
My name's Elias Crow, and if you're hearing this, it's because I need to get it out before it eats me alive from the inside. I ain't one for talking much. Folks in Vale say I'm as quiet as the fog that rolls in off the ridges, but some things fester if you keep 'em bottled up. This is one of those things. It happened back in the fall of 2021, when the leaves were bleeding red and gold across the mountains, and the air had that crisp bite that promises winter's coming hard. I was a ranger then, still am now, though the job don't sit the same on my shoulders anymore. Vale's a speck of a town in the heart of Appalachia, nestled in a valley where the Blue Ridge meets the Smokies, or close enough that the lines blur. We've got about 300 souls here, most of them kin to each other in some way, living in clapboard houses that lean against the wind. The forest presses in on all sides, thick with oak and hickory, pine and hemlock, the kind of woods that swallow trails and people alike if you ain't careful. I've called it home since I was a boy, but home ain't always a comfort. I grew up on the outskirts, in a cabin my granddaddy built with his own hands back when coal was king and men scratched a living from the earth. My pa worked the mines until a collapse took him when I was 12, leaving Ma and me to scrape by on what the garden gave and the odd jobs I could pick up. Ma was a quiet woman, with eyes that saw too much, always warning me about the woods. "There's places out there where the Lord don't look, Elias," she'd say, her voice thin as thread. "Hollows that pull at you, make you forget your way." I didn't pay it much mind back then. Kids think they're invincible. But I remember the stories she'd tell by the fire on winter nights, when the snow piled high and the wolves howled distant. Tales of pharaoh folk, people who'd gone wild in the deep woods, living like animals after getting lost or driven mad by isolation. Or the legends of the silent calls, echoes that weren't echoes, drawing the lonely deeper into the green. Appalachia breeds those kinds of stories. They're woven into the land like roots. After Ma passed from the cancer that ate her slow, I left for a spell. Joined the army, saw parts of the world that made the mountains seem tame. But war has its own hollows, dark places in your mind where the screams echo long after the guns fall silent. I came back to Vail in my 30s, married to a girl from down in Knoxville who thought the quiet life would suit us. It didn't. She left after 5 years, saying the silence was too loud, that I was too much like the trees, rooted but unreachable. No kids, no ties, just me in the cabin again. That's when I took the ranger job. It fit like an old boot, patrolling the national forest, marking trails, dealing with lost hikers or poachers. The pay ain't much, but the woods don't judge. They just are. And in the quiet hours, when I'm alone on a ridge watching the sun dip low, I feel a kind of peace. Or I did, before Black Hollow. The hollows are a feature of this land, like the creeks or the caves. They're depressions, some natural, some maybe from old mining sinks, dropping sharp into the earth with walls of shale and clay that crumble underfoot. Sound does funny things in them, bounces wrong, gets absorbed or amplified in ways that mess with your head. Black Hollow was one of the bad ones, way out on the eastern fringe, a good 10 miles from the nearest paved road. It was named for the black soil at the bottom, rich and wet, but folks said it was black for other reasons. Dark deeds, lost lives. I'd heard the tales from the old-timers at Harlan's bait shop. Harlan was a fixture in Vail, his shop a ramshackle place by the creek where you'd go for worms or ammo, but mostly for the company. He lost a leg in Vietnam, but his mind was sharp, full of stories. Black Hollow's got a voice, Elias. He'd rasp over a chaff tobacco. Calls to those with empty hearts. Rangers before you went down and didn't come up. Remember old Jedediah? 1950s, they say he heard his dead wife's voice down there, followed it right into oblivion. I'd not sip my coffee and change the subject. Superstition, I figured. But there were facts mixed in. Missing persons reports dating back decades, hikers vanishing without a trace, search parties coming up empty, and the feral people legends, Harlan swore by them. They're out there, boy, descendants of runaways or miners who went underground and came back changed. Pale skin, wild eyes, living in the shadows. Black Hollow's their domain. I'd seen signs myself, odd footprints too big for bear, scraps of cloth caught on thorns, eerie howls that weren't coyote. Once on a patrol near the hollow's rim, I found a crude cabin hidden in the brush, logs lashed together, roof of sod, empty but for a fire pit still warm. No one around, but the air felt watched. I reported it, but nothing came of it. The woods keep their secrets. The week before it all went to hell, things started feeling off. It was late October, the tourist season winding down, leaves crunching underfoot like brittle bones. I'd been pulling long shifts covering for another ranger out with the flu. Mornings were foggy, the kind where you can't see 10 feet, and the birds seemed hushed like they were listening for something. One evening, as I was locking up the station, I got a call from Mrs. Whitaker, an old widow who lived on the edge of town. Her dog had run off into the woods, and she swore she heard it barking from the direction of Black Hollow. But it weren't right, Elias, she said, her voice trembling over the line. The barks came back slow, like an echo, but then it sounded like my name. Please, check on it. I promised I would, but by the time I hiked out the next day, the dog was back home, whining at her door like nothing happened. She looked at me strange when I told her. That weren't my dog calling then, she muttered. Something else. A couple days later, I was on trail maintenance near the hollow when I felt it, a prickle on the back of my neck, like eyes boring into me. I turned, but nothing there, just the trees swaying gently in the breeze. Then, faint as a dream, I heard my name, Elias, whispered from down the slope toward the hollow. I froze, heart thumping, called out, but no answer. Chalked it up to wind through the leaves, but sleep evaded me that night. In my cabin with the fire crackling low, I thought of Ma's stories, of the lonely being called. Was I lonely? The
The divorce still stung, nights alone with a bottle for company. Friends in town were few, Harlan, maybe the bartender at the one dive we had. But deep down, yeah, there was an emptiness, a hollow in me matching the ones in the land. Then came the missing persons alert. It was a Tuesday, sky overcast like a bruise. I was at the station, going over maps, when the radio sputtered to life. Dispatch from the county seat. Ranger Crow, we've got an overdue hiker. Sarah Mills, 34, from Charlotte. Checked in for a day hike to Black Hollow area, didn't return last night. Family's worried. I remembered her, she'd stopped by for a permit 3 days prior. Pretty woman, dark hair dyed back lurid. Said she was cleaning her head after a bad breakup. Just need some space, she'd smiled, but her eyes were shadowed. I warned her about the terrain, the weather turning, but she seemed determined. I'll be fine, she said. Now she wasn't. I geared up quick, thermal layers under my uniform, backpack with MREs, water purifier, medkit, flares, knife, and my .40 caliber Glock. Rope for the descent, headlamp, compass, though GPS was spotty in the hollows. Radioed my plan. Hike to the rim, assess, descend if needed. The drive out was tense, truck rumbling over gravel roads that wound like snakes through the hills. Fog lingered in the low spots and the radio played static more than music. At the trailhead, an old logging cut overgrown with kudzu, I parked and shouldered my pack. The air was still, smelling of pine resin and earth, and the path ahead disappeared into the mist. "This is Crow, heading in," I said into the radio. Static answered, then a faint "copy." The hike started easy, familiar trail through dense forest, boots crunching leaves. Squirrel scampered, a deer bolted across my path, white tail flashing. But as I climbed the ridge, the woods changed. Trees grew closer, branches interlacing like fingers, light dimming to a greenish twilight. The air cooled and sounds muffled, my footsteps dull thuds, breath loud in my ears. I paused at a stream, filling my canteen, the water gurgling cold and clear. That's when I heard it again, that whisper, "Elias," from ahead down the slope toward the hollow. I straightened, scanning the underbrush. "Hello?" No response. Heart racing, I moved on, telling myself it was imagination, the stories getting to me. By noon, I reached the rim. Black hollow spread below, a gaping wound in the earth, walls steep and sheer, dropping 80 feet to a flat bottom shrouded in shadow. Sparse vegetation clung to the sides, ferns, vines, a few twisted saplings. The bottom was darker, patches of mud gleaming wet, boulders scattered like forgotten graves. No sign of life, no bird circling, just that heavy silence. I called out, "Sarah, Sarah Mills." My voice rang out, then echoed back, but delayed like it had circled a bowl before returning, and altered, the pitch lower, drawn out. "Sarah." A chill crawled up my spine. Harlan's words echoed in my head. "Sound don't act right." I tied off the rope to a sturdy pine, tested the knot, and started down. The wall was treacherous, loose rocks shifting, sending cascades below. I rappelled in stages, feet braced, rope humming through my hands. Sweat stung my eyes, muscles straining. Halfway, I rested on a ledge, chest heaving. Below, the bottom seemed to pulse, shadows shifting subtle. Called again, "Sarah?" The echo came back fragmented. "Sarah, Elias, come." My name woven in. I nearly lost my grip, fear spiking sharp. What the hell was this? Wind, acoustics, or something more, like Ma said it, the land calling. Reaching the bottom, my boots sank into mud, cold seeping through. The air was stagnant, thick with the scent of rot and minerals, like an old cellar. Silence enveloped me, absolute. No wind, no insects, just my pulse thundering. I detached the rope, swept my flashlight around, though it was day. The beam cut through gloom, revealing the floor, uneven, puddled water, rocks moss-covered. I moved inward, calling periodically, each echo more distorted. Tracks appeared, boot prints, fresh, leading centerward. Sarah's. I followed, tension coiling in my gut. The call came then, not an echo, but independent. "Elias." Faint from everywhere, walls, ground, air. I spun, gun drawn now, but empty space. "Who's there?" No answer. The shadows lengthened unnatural, though the sun should be high. They stretched from boulders, forming shapes, limbs, figures, beckoning. Heart pounding, I pressed on, finding her pack near a rock cluster. Red, muddied, empty, save wrappers. As I touched it, the call swelled. "Elias, stay." Lonely. Visions assaulted me, flashes of rangers past, faces gone, eyes pleading, trapped in the mud, calling. Terror gripped me. I dropped the pack, bolted for the rope. Mud clutched, shadows coiled, call roaring in my skull. Climbed frantic, hands raw, visions fading as I crested the rim. Collapsed, gasping, radioed help. Sarah was never found. Searches yielded nothing. I still hear the call some nights, whispering from the woods. Is it real, or my loneliness echoing? In these mountains, the line blurs, and the hollow never truly releases you.